Years from now, apparently, I'm going to stand in front of a god and audit it. Politely. With a book of its own promises, reading them back line by line until it understands it's been caught. There's a voice behind my ribs that tells me to remember the borrowed boots and the 49 copper coins. None of that had happened yet. I was 22, wearing a jacket that didn't fit, missing a button from one cuff, and I had about 90 seconds left to live. Brussels. The Hall of Concord. 600 people, and a water glass on the lectern I studied, because looking at faces was worse. I'd found a missing button in the lift 7 minutes earlier and had no time to fix it, so I hid that wrist behind the lectern and tried to look like my clothes hadn't come from a taller cousin. My phone buzzed. A text telling me not to rush the last part and to eat something afterwards. I almost smiled. Then the chairwoman gave me a look, and I turned the phone face down. I started the speech. Something about institutions being trusted when people inside them accept responsibility before they're forced to. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. The first explosion came right after I said responsibility. The lectern jumped under my hands. Glass collapsed beyond the western doors. The sentence in my earpiece died halfway through a French word. For 1 second, the hall was completely silent. 600 faces turned toward me. It was the attention I'd wanted all morning. I didn't want it anymore. The second blast was closer, violent enough to throw people from their chairs. The lights went out. I shouted not to use the western exits. The microphone was dead, but the chamber carried my voice. They surged into the aisles anyway. Steel shutters started sliding down over the main doors. I'd spent 3 weeks reading this building's safety files, and those shutters divided fire zones. They weren't meant to seal a chamber during evacuation. Either the system had failed, or somebody had told it to. I climbed onto the first row of seats and started directing people to the east galleries and service stairs. Some officer told me to get down. I told him the main exits had just locked 600 people inside. He knew about the manual release behind the red cover because he'd memorized the emergency plan on the train. Stupid answer, and also true. He tore the cover off and hauled the lever. Panic found a direction, which was often the closest thing to control anyone ever got. An elderly interpreter had gone down near the aisle. I crouched beside her, said good when she mentioned her ankle, then admitted that was a bad choice of word. The officer took her other side. Captain Merrick Vale, scar under one ear, the steady breathing of someone who'd learned what panic cost. We exchanged names in the worst possible way. He almost smiled. Almost. The lower stairwell was blocked, so I redirected people to the records wing, which an article I'd read it to in the morning had called wasteful. I divided people into smaller groups, hands visible, voice low, because when people can't hear the words, they watch the hands. A teenage delegate froze, phone clutched in both hands, his mother outside. I told him to tell her where he was going. He asked what if he didn't get out. I told him not to waste the first message. He started typing. Then someone shouted the north stair was clear, and we started moving them through. Something struck the floor beneath us. A dull metallic impact, then a steady, electronic chirp. Merrick went very still. We found a black transit case on a freight trolley, red display blinking. 3 minutes and 7 seconds. Nobody could disarm it before 0. I spotted the archive vault, built for fire and collapse. It might take the blast. Marek's leg buckled, and only then did I see the blood through his trouser leg. Glass, he said. We pushed the case inside. The vault door had manual bolts on our side. The chamber was almost empty. Almost. That word had people inside it. I told Merrick he needed to clear the north route. He said I was 22. That wasn't enough life for this. I said probably not. He offered to stay. I asked who clears the north exit if there's another device. I put my hand on the door and said I'd come to give a speech about responsibility, and it would be embarrassing to leave before the practical exam. He said my jokes were terrible. I said mixed feedback. Merrick pulled me in by the collar, pressed our foreheads together once. No speech. Just one exhausted person telling another he was seen. Then he limped toward the stairs. Before the gap closed, he asked my name. I nearly answered. Then I said, write the report first, and pulled the door shut. Darkness. The red numbers. 41 seconds. 3 bolts. The last one, I braced my foot against the wall. Then I sat against the steel with nothing left to do, and the fear finally reached me. At 5, I thought of home. At 4, a kitchen light. At 3, rain against a window. At 1, I wondered if the boy had sent his message. The blast arrived as pressure and heat and the collapse of every direction. Then nothing. Only white, stretching without floor or ceiling. Then a man's voice said that was either very brave or exceptionally stupid. A woman's voice from the exact same place said it was both. I turned. I looked down. Still wearing the visitor badge, blank now, jacket torn at the cuff. Apparently death had respected the dress code. I tried breathing out of habit. Nothing came in. Nothing needed to. No echo. No floor. And yet I didn't fall. Then I saw them. One body, one head, one pair of arms. The left half was a woman, pale, white gold hair, and I like a small moon. The right half was a man, darker, black hair threaded with red, and I like a sun that had burned through everything. A thin gold seam split them from forehead to throat. Behind their head hung a broken ring of roots and pages, with pieces missing. Beautiful the way old cathedrals are. Impressive, deliberate, and one bad winter from falling down. The man's half smiled and said I'd taken my time. The woman said I'd been dead. I asked if I was dead. Yes. No softening. Somehow that helped. I asked about the people in the hall. Most got out, the woman said. 187 left alive. 23 did not. A number is worse than not knowing. It gives the absence a shape. I asked for names. She said no, not today. Something in her voice wasn't refusal. It was mercy, and she was clearly out of practice. They introduced themselves. Czar, creator, architect, occasional failure. Almina, who omits her titles because modesty is her preferred method of intimidation. 2 of them in one body, not remotely normal. Then the white changed and a world appeared below us. Forests, mountains, coasts. Gerxer said. The image broke into pieces. Armed people laughing. A child reading her own name off a pane of light, delighted. Then a wagon, a line of people, a clerk writing down their heights, a collar on a table, open and waiting. A stamp coming down. Property. I understood it, even though the letters were in no language I knew. They'd build a world where worth could be measured so no bloodline could hoard it. It didn't occur to them that a thing which can be measured can also be priced. I told them to fix it. They couldn't. Every time they reached into that world, it cost them something they didn't get back. So they spent people instead. 2 before me. Where were they? Trying. I was the 3rd. The last. Why me? 22. Never run anything. Never held a weapon. Because I'd read the emergency plan. A room panicked, and I'd given it a process. Everyone wants to be brave. Almost no one thinks to be useful. Almina showed me what they were offering. A sphere holding stars at impossible distances. I felt every question I'd ever asked. The cost was mana, time, knowledge, consequence, and eventually blood, though they preferred not to lead with that in the recruitment materials. Could I refuse? Yes, Almina said. I couldn't go back to my body, but I could rest. No punishment. They wouldn't buy a world with manufactured consent. I closed my eyes. 23 people hadn't left the building. I'd carry that anyway. And somewhere a stamp kept coming down, turning people into property. I said yes, on the condition they answer my questions about the world. Its laws, languages, materials, history. Not the future, not who to trust. Because advice that removes a choice is only another kind of rule. One problem, Zer said. My name belonged to a world whose rules stopped here. I needed one the world could hold. Czar said Mateon. Almina said Gale. The 2 words came out heavier than sound. Mateon Gale. Unfamiliar, but not foreign. Like a door in a house I'd lived in all my life and never opened. I said it. Pain came back. Something went in under my left eye and wrote itself toward the bone. Gold came through my fingers. A fracture shaped exactly like the seam dividing the 2 gods. The system spoke. Authority transfer complete, partial. Bearer, Mateon Gale. All-knowing worlds, rank F. Ask the world a question and it answers what it knows. Druid extraction, rank F. Take water, fiber, resin, or out of dead matter. Astronomic space, rank F. A room behind the world to store what my hands couldn't carry. Exception, sealed, locked until a law contradicts another. Level 1, mana 100 over 100. Warning, 3 of 4 authorities exceeded the bearer's capacity. Damage on use was expected. After a lifetime of being told my worth by formulas I wasn't allowed to see, somebody had finally handed me the sheet. Then something vast opened inside me, and I understood I was much too small to hold it. Czar said he'd become less handsome, a tragedy with few witnesses. Almina said they'd remain where they could. When I called for knowledge, one of them might answer. Sometimes neither. Not as rulers, not as conscience. Possibly as commentary. Unhelpful commentary, Almina said. The finest kind. I asked about the thing already there, the one that got there first. Almina looked like someone who'd run out of time to lie. Do not go looking for her. She was very good at being found. The white cracked under my knee, and a world that was not Earth reached up through the crack and took me. The first thing I learned about another world was that moss tasted terrible. I rolled onto my back, and every muscle complained. Above me, branches spread across a sky the color of pale glass, bark dark silver with green lines glowing underneath. Something with too many wings moved between them. I closed my eyes and muttered that I was still dead. A warm male voice answered from nowhere. Then a quieter female voice said I was lying in wet vegetation, talking to myself. I asked if that was Czar. Part of him. Almina? Part of her. Not comforting. I checked myself. My jacket was torn, cuff gone, soot on the shirt. The clothes should have burned. So should I. But no wound, no broken ribs. A translucent line appeared. I jerked back and nearly planted my hand in violet mushrooms. The letters followed my gaze. I read the name twice. It still felt borrowed. I asked where I was, and the world exploded inside my head. Maps, oceans larger than continents, cities under glaciers, 3 measurements for planetary curvature. I told it to stop. Czar laughed. Almina said the archive answered exactly what I asked. Technically impressive, but useless. I had known professors like that. Then something roared. The sound rolled through the ground. I stood. The clearing was maybe 40 meters across. No road, no path, no sign pointing toward civilization. I had gods, system windows, and ranked monsters, but no tutorials. Pockets empty. No phone, no wallet, not even my speaking schedule. First priority was water. I asked how to use druid extraction. Something unfolded behind my sternum. The forest became layers. I focused on 6 flowers, and a sphere of water gathered above my hand. I stared. It collapsed and splashed across my shoes. Zer nearly laughed. By the 4th attempt, I had a headache. 8 mana for less than 2 liters. Useful but not free. I made a spear from fallen tree. The instructions were perfect. My hands were not. 20 minutes later, I had a stake that looked like evidence of frustration. Stone bound with strips of my tie. Ugly but sharp. Czar said it had a point. A disputed point. The head wobbled. Then a creature stepped in. 6 legs, body like a small deer, moss on its spine, antlers holding blue flowers. It decided I was either dangerous or embarrassing and went back to grazing. Then every bird went silent. Something heavy and fast crashed through the undergrowth. A boar stretched over a hunting cat, black thorns on its shoulders, jaw split with 2 rows of inward teeth. It spotted the blood on my fingers. Almina said my spear had poor durability. Zer said not to mistake information for experience. It charged. I jumped behind a root. It struck the bark and threw splinters. I drove the spear down, and it scraped uselessly across the thorns. The jaw snapped where my knee had been. I lost a shoe and ran. No dignity. I vaulted one root, slipped on the next. Ahead, 2 giant roots made an arch over a ravine. Too small for the creature. Maybe too small for me. I shoved the spear into astronomic space and crawled under. Thorns raked my back. I kicked on instinct, and it tore my shoe off. It could not fit through. It clawed and snarled, filling the space with hot breath and the smell of wet iron. I rolled down the far slope. The creature chewed my shoe. Czar said he once watched a king lose a war over one. I threw stones into the brush, and it chased the sound. Torn trousers, blood on both palms, one soaked sock. I survived my first monster by crawling through mud and sacrificing imported footwear. Very heroic. I asked about a healing skill. Yes, I had one. No, I did not have it. Excellent. Then a sound above me. A small animal on a thick root. Like a husky assembled, using instructions for a cat. Gray and black and white fur, one blue, one golden. It looked from me to my missing shoe and back. It made sounds. I said I did not speak whatever that was. It climbed down, sniffed my bandage, and slapped my hand away. Not scratched. Slapped. It walked toward a gap in the trees and looked back. I did not move. It returned, grabbed my trouser leg, and pulled. I picked up the crooked spear. It looked at the spear, then at me, with genuine disappointment. Everyone is a critic. It led me downhill beneath ferns, stopping me from stepping on colored insects, growling at harmless flowers. After 10 minutes, we reached a hollow under fallen roots. Dry inside, stream nearby, narrow entrance. Someone had lined one side with dry grass. I asked the first honest question since I died. Why was it helping me? It settled on the grass and regarded me as if it had been waiting a long time for someone to ask. It did not answer, but it did not leave. In a world with no tutorial, no map, and no shoes, I decided a companion who stayed was worth more than any answer. Barney kept one paw over his golden eye, as if he could hide from the system by refusing to acknowledge it. A translucent window hovered above him. He stared at me and slapped the empty air. The window vanished. He licked the same paw with the slow dignity of someone who had just closed a door in my face. I said he had seen it, understood it, and dismissed it. He moved to the next paw. I considered asking what sort of creature could dismiss a system window, but remembered what happened when I asked where I was and nearly liquefied my brain. Small questions only. I asked what foreign binding men applied to a living soul. The answer covered nearly everything unpleasant. Barney's ears angled toward me, but his body performed exaggerated disinterest. I told him to keep his secrets. He grunted like I had chosen correctly. I said I had inherited divine powers, 2 invisible advisors, and a companion who already knew how to ignore me. Czar's voice arrived, quiet and dry. I had not yet encountered bureaucracy. I froze. He had been absent since the Ravener. Not gone, only silent. I asked what Barney was. No, too fast. The most suspicious no since dying. Almina said they would answer questions about the world's functions and my authorities, but not identify individuals whose nature would influence my judgment. So they did know. That was not what she said. Barney looked at me, arguing with my skull, and sneezed. 3 advisors, 1 communicating through contempt. My body submitted its complaints. Burning palms, aching shoulders, hunger beneath my ribs. I had eaten 2 ashberries. Barney had eaten 4. I told him to pretend to feel guilty. His eyes closed. Guilt cost more calories than he would spend. I emptied astronomic space onto the grass. Branches, stones, vine, berries, the spear, in a water sphere that immediately remembered gravity. It splashed under Barney's forelegs. He rose slowly. A container had been added to the list. He relocated to the driest patch with his back turned. Priorities: water, shelter, fire, food. I had water and shelter I had not built. Fire remained. I used druid extraction to comb dry bark from dead branches. Then my fingers brushed a living root, and the world inside it opened. Water through channels, mana through cells, something deeper and older. Taking material straight from the root seemed obvious for one instant. I pulled away. It felt too close to cutting flesh from a sleeping creature because it was convenient. Almina explained that life was not materials waiting for a user. Extraction changed everything connected to the root. Restoration only determined who paid the debt. I took only fallen wood. I built the fire the way the archive insisted. Fine bark, thin twigs, a loose cone with gaps for air. Then I struck gray shard together. Nothing. A chip at my cheek. Czar called it progress toward a smaller stone. After the 9th attempt, I changed my grip. After the 20th, I suspected the stones were collaborating against me. 2 divine voices and no fire. Almina said I had hands. 1 bleeding. Use the other. Barney returned during the 23rd attempt, carrying something black. He dropped it by my knee, denser than gray shard, marked with pale metallic veins. He knew where this was. He sat. I asked how long he watched me hit rocks together. He scratched behind one ear. I called him cruel and picked up the sparkstone. First spark died on damp soil. Second vanished. Third made smoke. I blew and got smoke in my face. Barney moved 2 steps away and watched with clean lungs. Coward. 11 more attempts. Once the resin caught for half a second and died with a sound that felt disrespectful. On the last, try a point of orange stayed alive. I cupped my hands and breathed slow. A thin flame climbed one strip and spread through the twigs with a soft, hungry crackle. The fire was pathetic, barely enough to warm my hands. I felt absurdly proud. Barney stretched his paws toward it like he had supervised construction. He contributed 1 stone. A vital stone, I admitted. Then I smelled blood on his muzzle. He walked into the ferns and came back dragging a dead animal. Like a hare, but nearly the size of a small dog. Copper ears and 2 horn-like growths behind its eyes. He dropped it by the fire with the expression of a creature who had provided the shelter, the spark, and the dinner, and was waiting to see if I would contribute anything. I looked at the fire I had barely made, the food I had not caught, and the companion I had not asked for. On Earth, worth was a number other people assigned to me. Here, on the first night of my second life, worth was simpler and heavier and entirely mine to earn. I drew the crooked spear across my knee and began to prepare the meal that something braver than me had provided. First night, let's not die. Above the canopy, the pale sky began to darken. And somewhere far to the north, a broken world turned in its sleep, unaware an auditor had arrived to count it. I discovered that morning that improvised fieldcraft did not consider dignity a construction material. The result was a ridge hair hide wrapped around my bare foot, held by a vine, with bark to keep it from sawing my skin. Practical. It looked like my foot had lost an argument with a dead rabbit. Barney sneezed when I told him to say nothing. Czar said the workmanship was improving, then clarified he meant the rabbit. I told him I had preferred him when I thought he was a solemn divine remnant. He pointed out that had lasted 7 minutes. By dawn the flask held water, the spearhead was secure, and the shoe had survived 3 laps around the shelter. I rubbed ash and bitter leaf across everything. We were hiding our scent. Barney backed away, said I smelled like cooked meat, which he meant as a security concern, then presented his back. Negotiations concluded. My mana had recovered to 89 overnight. Enough for several small extractions. Not enough to waste if the valley held soldiers or monsters or more objects designed by people who turned suffering into paperwork. I set 3 stone arrangements at the shelter mouth. Barney watched me place the 3rd. I told him I was not founding a country before breakfast. He said his confidence in me was touching. We reached the western ridge after sunrise. No bells, no shouting, nothing moving below. Barney went north along the ridge, nose low. Where we had found the collar, Barney stopped beside a broken fern. Dried blood on a leaf, a shallow footprint with a wrapped foot covering part of it. The prisoner had gone north. 30 meters away, a pale stake stood between 2 roots with a metal cap and a black thread disappearing into the soil. The system identified it as a Dunan perimeter listener, E-rank, detecting movement across a registered line and storing up to 12 disturbances. Active and buried. Somebody had turned the forest itself into a checkpoint. The fugitive's trail curved north well before the thread. He had seen the line, or known it was there. I considered breaking the stake for about 1 second, then decided silence was the only thing here that cost me nothing. I congratulated it on being the first government device I had ever chosen not to kick. The trail crossed bare stone, doubled back through water, went under thorn brush. Twice I lost the signs. Twice Barney found them. At mid-morning, he stopped beside a hollow log. Inside were a broken chain link, cloth torn into a wound dressing, and bones chewed nearly clean. Alive long enough to eat. Then Barney's posture changed. A faint scrape from past the log. I lowered the spear and came around 1 step at a time. A high goblin crouched under the roots of a fallen tree. Smaller than I expected, broad through the shoulders. gray-green skin under mud and dried blood. A torn mining coat, chain bruises around his throat, stone blade in both hands. The tip was shaking. His eyes were not. He spoke in a language I had never heard. 0% comprehension. Of course. His gaze stopped on my formal boot. The fear in his face sharpened into hate. I understood that without translation. I set the spear down. The blade tracked it. Then I took the broken collar out of astronomic space and laid it beside the spear. He threw himself backward, so hard his shoulder hit the root. I stepped away and raised both empty hands. Barney walked between them. They exchanged growls and clicks I caught none of. Barney glanced back like this was my embarrassing deficiency. I told him I was delighted they had formed a committee without me. The goblin swayed, blood soaking through his thigh. I set the flask and meat halfway between us, then walked backward until I hit a tree. He watched me for a long time, then crawled forward and grabbed the flask. Water escaped the bad seam over his fingers. I shrugged and told him it had personality. The hate in his face slipped into confusion, which was cheaper and came first. Then Barney's head snapped toward the forest. A branch bent where there was no wind. The goblin pointed past me and said one word. I did not understand the word. I understood the terror. In the mud beside the log, a fresh print was filling with blood-red sap, bigger than Barney, and it had come up the same trail we had. The footprint filled before I decided whether the red in it was blood. The smell hit me next. Iron, wet bark, something sweet enough that my stomach objected. Barney lowered his belly to the mud. The goblin pressed under the roots, knife at his throat. I counted exits. North to open stone, east to the perimeter, west to a gully of black water. Only one didn't end at a checkpoint. I pointed west. The goblin answered with a word that sounded like a refusal, sharing a throat with a threat. Good, democracy was alive. The branch snapped. A low shape slid out between the ferns. Bark-colored plates over the shoulders, forelegs longer than hind legs, wide paws pressing red sap into the soil. A narrow head following the blood trail rather than looking at us. A bloodsap stalker, level 12, E-rank. An opportunistic pursuit predator whose visual attention was secondary to scent. Of course, it had a professional specialization. The goblin's leg had bled through again, and this thing was built for exactly that. I pulled the last cooked meat from storage, wrapped it in the blood-stained mining cloth, rolled it in ash and bitter leaf. Not enough to erase the blood, just enough to make a bigger stranger smell easier to follow than a wounded man. I pointed east at the perimeter, then at the bundle, then west at us. The goblin thought I should distract it. Tempting proposal, poor benefits. Barney struck the goblin's wrist, then pointed at the gully. 2 breaths of nobody moving. Then the goblin shifted west. Cooperation, not trust. I threw the bundle east. The stalker went after it, so fast the ferns folded flat. I grabbed the flask, spear, and collar. Barney was already in the gully. The goblin followed with a worsening limp. I went last, black water to my ankles. The goblin stumbled, and I caught his forearm. The knife came toward my ribs. I let go instantly. He stayed up by grabbing a reed. No apology, no permission. Behind us, the stalker tore the decoy apart. Then silence. Less time than advertised. The gully narrowed. He went through sideways. I crawled. Behind us, the stalker entered the water. I pointed at his wound, then at my pouch. He bared his teeth but held it out instead of coming closer. Claws scraped stone behind us. He packed the mixture under the cloth with the speed of someone who'd treated wounds without medicine before. Practice meant repetition. That frightened me more than incompetence. His body locked. A sound came through his teeth. I didn't make a joke. The bleeding slowed. Barney pulled the goblin through a gap by his coat. I came last. Stone caught the gold thread at my shoulder. My formal clothing survived terrorism only to be defeated by geology. The stalker reached the opening as I dragged my leg through. A paw came in, claws raking the hide shoe. The vine binding snapped. I kicked free, leaving half the shoe behind. The gap was too narrow for its shoulders, but the roots above were old and split, holding loose stone. I pointed up. The goblin understood. We struck the same root together. Knife cut wood. I drove the spearhead in and hauled. Barney jumped on the root and drove both paws down. It broke. Stone and soil came down. The stalker pulled back before the gap sealed. Its roar came through the earth as vibration. Red sap seeped between the stones. No claw followed. The collapse had blocked it, not killed it. The stalker followed blood because that was what it was made to do. The collar, the listener, the camp, those were made by people who could have chosen otherwise. Then the goblin put his knife against my side. I told him we'd survived long enough to restore normal diplomatic relations. The pressure eased. The blade stayed close. We went west until the gully opened under dark stone. Water ran over pale mineral sand. Sandhold's prints. Barney stopped. His tracks mined the goblins. A fourth crossed all three. Smaller, barefoot. A short chain lay pressed into one print. The goblin went to one knee. He touched the footprint with 2 fingers, struck his chest, then pointed deeper into the forest. Not alone. A second prisoner had made it past the perimeter, and whoever they were still walking. The high goblin managed 4 steps before his knee folded like a cheap lawn chair. I caught his coat before his face hit the sand, and he twisted around with that stone knife coming up between us. Our first shared phrase was still attempted stabbing. Barney growled west. Someone ahead, something behind. I pointed at the fugitive's bandage, then at a dark overhang past the gully, then held up a flat palm. Watch. Shelter. Stop. The fugitive pointed west at the second prisoner and tried to stand. His leg failed faster than before. I looked at the blood through his bandage and said no. His ears flattened. I pointed at the overhang and put my spear on the ground. Then I pointed at a stone knife. His grip tightened, and I understood the refusal because it was correct. I had just asked an injured escaped prisoner to give up the only object still under his control while my weapon sat within reach. The request had been practical. It had not been equal, so I pushed the spear further away with my boot and sat down beside it. He considered me, then Barney, then the overhang. Finally, he lowered the knife. Not surrendered. Lowered. It was enough. The overhang was shallow, dry at the back, and narrow enough that anything the stalker's size would struggle to enter fast. 2 exits. Barney checked it first, sneezed, looked personally offended by the smell, and went back in. I set 3 stones on the ground, 1 for each of us. I had founded 3 stones. Barney sat on his immediately. I traced a watch rotation through the positions. The high goblin pushed my stone out entirely and pointed west. I was supposed to go. He pointed at my 2 working legs, then at his wound. Hard to argue with that. Barney moved his stone back beside mine and showed 1 small tooth. Motion carried. The plan was still useless because the fugitive couldn't follow anyone until the wound was clean. I asked the archive what I could do with what I carried. The Divine Medical Service confirmed that water remained wet. Clean the wound, apply compression, keep the limb still. Healing function unavailable. Almina pointed out it had also stopped me from applying unknown forest poison. I said its bedside manner was improving. I pulled drinkable water from damp mineral sand for 3 mana. Cold water gathered above my hand in a trembling sphere. The high goblin had backed against the wall, so I poured a little over my own reopened palm first, wiped it clean, then set the flask halfway between us. Barney walked over, sniffed both, drank 1 mouthful, then looked at the fugitive. They exchanged words I didn't understand, but the knife came down another few centimeters. He cleaned the wound himself, jaw-locked. I demonstrated a pressure wrap on my own thigh. He watched once, took the material, and did it tighter than I had. When it was done, he closed his eyes for exactly 3 breaths. I used the pause to build the smallest administration of my life. Water, danger, watch, move, stop. The fugitive corrected my stop gesture. An open palm could mean surrender or harmless. A closed fist could be read through leaves and asked nobody to trust anybody. I replaced my gesture with a better one. Some tension left his shoulders, not because I'd taken charge, but because I hadn't insisted on keeping it. 5 meanings, 3 people, no common word. Not a language, but enough to prevent one avoidable death. Then the fugitive pulled a chain fragment from his coat and cleared a patch of damp sand. He drew a rectangle with rows of short lines, pressed the chain into one end. A camp, then a second square, joined by a narrow line. I pointed to the smaller footprints outside. He touched the second square and dragged his knife through the whole drawing. One enclosure became two. He pointed east toward the smoke, then west along the second prisoner's trail. The prisoner ahead hadn't escaped the same place by a different route. The camp had been split before either of them ran. The first dictionary of my second life was carved with a stone knife and contained no words. The high goblin cut one line into bark and touched his chest. Person. A second piece got two parallel cuts. Route. The third became a rough rectangle. Camp. I told Almina we had upgraded from government to paperwork. The fugitive carved a jagged mark beside his bandaged thigh. Pain. That one required no scholarship. We needed more than nouns. I pointed at the western trail and touched the camp symbol. The fugitive shook his head, laid his knife across the route mark, then pointed at me. The blade stopped a handspan from the gold thread on my coat. My fingers closed on the spear. Barney shouldered me in the shin. I let go and saw it properly. The knife had never been aimed at my throat. It had been aimed at the coat. The high goblin touched the clasp, pointed east, and dropped the chain fragment onto the camp symbol. Not me. The people my clothes looked like. I admitted I looked like I'd arrived to approve the budget. Almina told me to change the coat. I rubbed ash across the gold lines and tied dark cloth over the clasp. The result looked like a diplomat who had lost a procedural fight with a fireplace. Before we left, I made the fugitive a walking staff. He struck the ground once and kept it. The western trail went into denser forest where roots rose like walls. Our vocabulary failed the moment we tried discussing more than one thing. The high goblin carved two-person marks inside and beside the camp rectangle, laid the chain across both. Both prisoners, different sections, one chain. I tried asking whether they were the same species, and he swept both stones away, carving a hammer shape by one enclosure and three hooked lines by the other. I nearly assigned meanings. Instead, I touched my temple and turned both symbols face down. Unknown. He gave one slow nod. First thing I communicated by refusing to invent an answer. At the first fork, the tracks vanished. A fern hid cuts in the bark. Barney sniffed it and backed away, then scratched toward the right path. The high goblin crossed out the left branch. The fern's crushed stem had spread a bitter scent across the wrong path. A false trail or a warning. I turned my concealment symbol face down. We took the right path. After 20 minutes, the fugitive's staff began landing before every second step. I pointed at a root hollow for stop. He refused and pulled out two bark pieces with his knife between them, then pointed at me. I made myself wait. The knife wasn't a threat. It was dividing two options. Choice. I opened both hands toward him. He tapped the western route. Standing in the wet forest with a stolen coat and one shoe, I understood the test had never been whether I could guess right. It had been whether I'd reach for a weapon before admitting I might be wrong. He carved the sign again, slower. We added it to the others. Person, route, camp, concealment, pain, enemy, chain, choice. 8 ways to be less wrong than that morning. I asked the archive if an unfamiliar symbol could be read from its shape alone. No, meaning depended on culture, species, and convention. Almina said the Divine Archive had formally recommended I stop guessing. Near midday, the footprints came back beside dark water, less even now, one print sinking deeper at the heel. Whoever it was, they were tiring. We followed until Barney stopped, so suddenly I nearly walked over him. An ashvale tree wider than a house stood ahead, 7 short cuts around one long incision in the silver bark, dark resin pressed into every line. Dried reeds hung from a black cord beneath the mark. The small footprints went directly toward it. Barney's ears flattened. The high goblin froze, closed his fist, struck stone twice. Danger. I pointed past the tree. The fugitive stepped backward. He would not go near it. Barney looked like something recognizing a door it had hoped never to see again. The high goblin knew what happened to people who crossed the mark. Barney knew who had made it. I knew only that the smaller footprints went past the tree and had not come back. The High Goblin would not cross the shadow of the marked tree. I tested it step by step. One step left, his fist stayed closed. One step right, still closed. I angled toward the silver trunk, and his stone knife struck rock. Tap, tap. Stop. Danger. I called it a very strict tree. Almina told me not to reduce an unknown territorial structure to furniture. Czar pointed out it did have a border, a declaration, and an enforcement mechanism, which somehow made it worse. Barney worked along the shadow's edge with his nose low. I watched the ground. The smaller footprints went straight toward the trunk, but the forest did not. Beetle trails stopped at the roots. Bird tracks detoured around the western side. Even fallen leaves had gathered in a thin crescent against something I could not see. Not a wall. A boundary. I tossed a dry twig across. Nothing. The High Goblin gave me a look that needed no translation. Barney watched with the expression of a supervisor documenting avoidable mistakes. Then I pulled out the broken labor restraint. Dark iron, old leather, dried brown stains. The fugitive threw himself back, so hard his staff nearly slipped. I set the collar on the ground and used gestures to ask what it had to do with the boundary. He drew a line between the collar and the tree, then tapped the wound on his thigh. The collar, the boundary, his body. All connected. I tied a vine around the restraint and dragged it across with a branch. The 7 resin-filled cuts in the tree darkened. A root struck the collar and folded the iron. A second root crushed the control seal housing until the metal cracked. I pulled the vine and the root withdrew without a trace. The system confirmed it. A reactiva territorial cubanan. Foreign ownership enforcement structure entered the boundary and got disabled. Full terms unavailable. Authority insufficient. Warning. Living targets might produce a different response. Chain fragment, nothing. Brass buckle, nothing. The tree had attacked the control seal housing specifically, the part built to turn an order into pain. A boundary that could tell a chain apart from the authority inside. It was not a trap. It was a law with roots. It said no, not to me, to ownership. The High Goblin pulled his wrap aside and showed me a faint geometric scar under the wound. Lines too regular to be natural. Residual binding. The reason he would not cross. He carved 2 people in the bark, one with a broken chain. The smaller escapee, different enough to risk the boundary. I pointed west and mimed carrying someone. He shook his head. He did not know what happened after. Good. One answer, one uncertainty. I asked Almina if the Covenant could safely remove a living person's residual binding. Safely was not a property I had established. Could it remove it? Possibly. Could it kill him? Possibly. Her guidance remained inspirational. My questions remained premature. Barney came back from the western side with resin on one white paw, unhurt. He scratched an indirect route around the camp symbol and looked at me. I opened both hands. His choice. His tail lifted once. Leadership included knowing when somebody else was holding the map. We followed behind a wall of roots onto a narrow ledge. Behind a curtain of moss, we could see the far side without entering the boundary. The smaller footprints continued past the tree, then another trail joined them. Fresh, narrow, soft-soled with braided cord instead of military patterns. Whoever it was had stopped beside the exhausted escapee and turned west. No sign of a struggle. One print sank deep at the heel, the next barely touched. Then the escapee's trail stopped entirely, while the new tracks carried more weight. Carried. Helped, unless the forest had developed unusually polite kidnappers. The High Goblin's shoulders came down a fraction. Barney sniffed through the moss and made a quiet sound. Not a warning. Recognition. Again, the Covenant destroyed the tools of ownership, but had promised nothing about mercy toward people still carrying the marks. The second escapee had found someone on the other side. To follow, I was going to have to convince a tree that Orvek was not property. I stopped the High Goblin before he stepped across. The bark symbols lay in a row. Person, chain, danger, choice, stop, route. 8 symbols from 2 days of mistakes. Not a language. Barely a meeting agenda. Barney yawned. Almina said the committee had the problem and offered no solution. That was often the purpose of a committee. I drew 2 routes in the soil and handed the knife to the High Goblin. He scratched stop across the route that stayed, then cut through the chain beside the crossing route. I want to cross. I do not want the chain. Consent did not make the risk acceptable. It made the decision his to share. The control seal housing had split, and a black plate showed through. I set it near the scar. The lines lit up, and the scar answered beneath his skin. His jaw locked. I pulled the plate away. The archive came back restricted. Ownership classification, labor category, dormant pain compliance pathway, identity restriction, degraded claimant link. Control device disabled. Subject, physically active, legally unrecognized. Cruel enough to fit on a form. I separated the collar from the scar symbol. Object, person, not the same thing. The High Goblin watched twice, then moved the person further from the chain himself. I asked the narrowest question of my life. Smallest change to let this person cross the covenant without altering his name, race, memory, body, or unrelated bindings. The system found a contradiction. Dunin registered labor property versus control seal disabled, claimant absent, subject rejecting ownership, local covenant rejecting foreign enforcement. Minimum intervention. Suspend recognition of ownership within the 7-cut covenant. Mécanisme, exception. It did not erase the original record or invalidate ownership law outside this territory. One door opened by forcing 2 laws to disagree. Czar said it was survivable. Neither of us knew that. I arranged the person mark on one side, myself on the other, 7 stones between. I pushed one across. Cost mine. The High Goblin pointed at the danger mark. I nodded. He dragged the choice symbol back. His danger. I split it between us. Shared. Then he set the chain beneath my person mark. If I paid, would the chain change hands? I snapped the bark and set both person symbols side by side. No chain. Trust arriving all at once is usually stupidity in better clothes. He tapped the crossing route. Barney put one paw over the stop symbol. I said we would stop if something went wrong, as much as one can stop a divine legal dispute halfway through. Almina preferred irresponsible contradiction under incomplete authority. Less reassuring, more accurate. Then I saw his hand shaking and focused. One person, one scar, one covenant. The words came together like a petition I would have hated filing on Earth. Target the residual ownership linked to the broken seal. Scope this subject within the 7-cut covenant. Status person, owner none. I did not ask the world to become just. I asked it to stop lying about one man. The first exception petition. 18 mana consumed, 7 reserved, authority signature exposed, claimant granted right to contest. Success 63%. Non-fatal backlash 81%. Fatal backlash unavailable. I pointed out that unavailable was doing a lot of work. The High Goblin pressed his fist to his chest and touched the crossing route. I confirmed. Pain hit behind my left eye. Not heat, pressure. Something pulling a needle through the old divine mark. My vision broke into white edges. Barney caught my sleeve before I hit the root wall. The 7 cuts filled with gold. The High Goblin dropped to one knee as black lines spread from the scar up his thigh, drawing a chain beneath the skin. The pain pathway woke. His fingers clawed the soil. I tried to withdraw. The exception refused. Intervention contested by external claimant. Withdrawal might restore enforcement at increased intensity. Continue, transfer backlash to petitioner or abandon target. The polite version of a knife. I chose transfer. The pain came through the earth. My muscles locked. For 1 second, I smelled the conference hall. Smoke, hot wiring, concrete dust. My body preparing to die in a building that no longer existed. Barney's teeth tightened on my sleeve. I stayed. A root rose and touched the scar. The gold flashed. The chain broke at one link. Not vanished. Broken. Exception recorded. Living person. Ownership none. Authority self. Original Dunin record active outside the covenant. 7 mana reserved. Authority trace transmitted. I rolled onto my back. Breathing had become an administrative task my body was delegating. Barney growled at the tree. I agreed, poor customer service. Zer said I had filed a complaint against reality. I said I had one. He said I had received provisional recognition. I told him to let me have this. The High Goblin stood. The scar was still there, but the line nearest the boundary had split. I pointed west. His first step stopped at the leaves. His second crossed. Nothing struck him. The tree groaned. He laughed once, then pressed a hand to his chest and said, Orvek. I touched my own. Mateon. I pointed at Barney. Barney looked offended. A whistle from the western forest. 2 notes, pause 1. A hooded figure raised one empty hand between the roots. Braided boots, a short bow. The figure said Orvek's name. Relief crossed his face before caution came back. Then a thin blue line shot from the broken scar, passed through the marked tree, and vanished eastward. A horn answered beyond the ridge. 3 short blasts. The Dunnan Provincial Property Ledger contested the exception. Incident reclassified from escaped labor asset to foreign authority interference. Retrieval authorized. I stayed on the ground because standing had become a future policy objective. I asked if that was the appeal being received. The horn sounded again. Sir said no. That was the reply. The bow was aimed at my chest. That was considerate. Since my left, I already heard enough. The figure behind the hanging moss was a wood elf woman named Ivara, and she was not happy about our presence. Orvek tried to intervene, but she was having none of it. The horn sounded from the east, closer now, and she decided to take Orvek while leaving me as a problem for Dunna to sort out later. I stayed on the ground, legs gone numb. I asked if anyone had divine advice. Zar told me not to stand quickly, and pointed out the arrow was aimed below my heart. I said I was worried she might miss something important. I introduced myself with gestures since we shared no language. She tested me with something called a Claimwick thread, twisted moss wrapped around a black thread. Near Orvek, it stayed green. Near Barney, nothing. But half a meter from my face, it turned blue, reacting to my authority signature still attached to a contested Dunnan record. I had filed one appeal, and it cost me 7 points of maximum mana. Administrative fees had become aggressive. Ivara watched me argue with empty air and was not impressed. Then Orvek stepped between the arrow and me and vouched for me in a way that clearly cost him something. She lowered the bow and threw a strip of bloodied cloth at him. Someone they knew was injured and had moved west. Orvek tried to go after them immediately. She shoved him back, and they argued at each other for 3 extremely efficient seconds. I whispered to Zar that I believed she outranked him. He asked based on what. I said volume. She explained through gestures that if I used the hidden road, it would become visible to the outside, which was a serious problem. Orvek wanted to go together. She refused. I reached for my knife, and 3 weapons trained on me at once. I surrendered everything, including the control seal plate. That changed her expression. Not fear, recognition. She examined it, saw the provincial line pattern, and understood something about retrieval. Barney showed his teeth. Her gaze dropped to him, and something in her posture changed. Recognition of a new variable. Barney found a bell wire hidden under the roots, a Dunnan listening device. Ivara followed the wire and found a capsule. Barney sat beside it with the expression of someone waiting for an apology. She made a decision she clearly disliked. She gave the knife back to Orvek, not to me, then threw a blindfold at my chest. She pointed at my eyes, then west. At Orvek, then at the knife. Then she drew one finger across her own throat. The message was clear. I would go in blind and unarmed. Orvek would hold the knife as insurance. If I exposed the route, I would not survive the explanation. Sir called it reasonable. I told him he was not the one being escorted at knife point. He said he had been divided into advisory fragments and installed inside my mind. I said fine, second worst travel arrangement. Almina warned that the retrieval party was moving. Brush cracked east of us. Ivara pointed west. Now, I tied the blindfold over my eyes, and the dark closed in. Orvek grabbed my sleeve. Barney pressed against my leg. Then the thread brushed my wrist, and the blue stain spread through the moss again. Ahead, water moved over stone. Ivara pulled me forward. The route would hide Orvek. I was the thing it could not hide. We moved blind through the hidden route. The blindfold turned everything into sound and pressure. Water brushing stone on my left. Ivara's fingers on my wrist when the path narrowed. Orvek holding my sleeve from behind. Barney bumping my right calf. either guiding me or filing a complaint. Her bow came up. I told her that was her stopping, not me. Czar said there was no record. I said then this world had already failed administratively. She removed the blindfold in a narrow rock pocket, a safe place to rest without revealing the western passage. She made it very clear I should not look west. I said, don't look west. She tapped 2 fingers against her bow. I said, and the second reminder was an arrow, clear procedure. Orvek sat against the wall, jaw tight from his wound. Ivara had 1 water skin. 1. For drinkers. She gave it to Orvek first. He drank once and passed it back. She offered again. He refused. They argued with gestures, reaching open hostility in under 5 seconds. I said efficient. Almina asked if I admired poor conflict resolution. I said I admired speed. I drew up a ration plan in the dirt. Ivara erased my half portion and gave me 2. I said that seemed excessive. So I said I could not organize anyone while unconscious. I said I had attended meetings that suggested otherwise. He said I died after one. I said that was terrorism, not poor chairmanship. Almina told me to drink the water. I drank. Not much. Enough that the ache under my ribs eased. Barney drank in careful little laps. Orvek took his share without arguing. Ifara drank last. Nobody got what they wanted. Everybody got enough to keep moving. That was usually the beginning of a workable policy. Then Ivara examined me. She checked my pulse and nails, then reached for the mark below my eye. I pulled back. I held up 1 finger. Ask first. She waited. I nodded. Her thumb touched the skin. Pain ran behind my eye, and I caught her wrist on instinct. Everyone tensed. I let go and said pain, then touched my chest and shook my head. Not you. She checked again, carefully this time. I called it a successful consultation by emergency room standards. Almina said my standards were becoming suspiciously convenient. She tested the Claimwick thread near my wrist. Blew immediately. She pointed at the stream. I asked the system what the water could do about the trace. Running water disrupted weak transmission and reduced surface residue, but active claims, reserved authority costs, direct recognition by a valid witness, and deliberate tracking already fixed on me were not affected. 64% confidence. Reduced transmission was not severance. I dipped my hand in the stream and had Ivara test again. The blue came back slower, faint at first, then stronger. A smaller emergency, not relief. She pointed at everyone's boots and paws. Wash everything that touched the Easter Trail. We worked without language. Barney objected to the shallow channel. I told him he had walked through blood, mud, and 1 dead animal. He hooked both front paws over a stone and refused to move. Ivara pushed from behind. He showed her 1 small white tooth. She stopped. I said he had invoked diplomatic immunity. Almina sighed and said, wash the animal. It took all 3 of us. He came out soaked, furious, and twice his normal width. He shook himself between me and Ivara. And for the first time, Orvek laughed. Rough and short and surprised. Barney noted a future grievance. The laugh stopped when the bell wire sounded through the stone. Ivara touched the 3rd knot on her wrist cord. She pointed at the western roots and shook her head. No further. Not on her word alone. She raised 2 fingers. A second scout was needed before a stranger crossed the 3rd waterline. I nodded. A rule that limited her own discretion. I liked it immediately. That worried me. Then something moved in the channel under the stone shelf. A small blue head rose, 2 black eyes, and wet blue skin. It looked at each of us. Click. 1 for Ivara. Click. Orvek. Click. 4 fingers from Ivara. Click. Then it stared at me. Click. Click. 2 for me. 5 total. There were 4 bodies in the rock pocket. Then it slipped under the surface and swam west, toward the route Ivara was not allowed to show me. The blue creature carried its 5th click west and vanished. Ivara tapped the stone 4 times. Nothing answered. I said chasing the witness through the forbidden entrance would probably be poor manners. Zer said it would be trespassing. I said he did not know their law. He said he knew me. Barney approached the channel. A bubble rose. He jerked back. The blue head surfaced again, clicked once at Barney, then drifted to Ivara. Click. Orvek. Click. Me. Click. Then it stayed in front of me. Click. Click. 2 for me. I murmured recognition. Czar said as a problem. I said recognition was recognition. Almina told us both to stop celebrating the possible parasite. The creature had not clicked at objects or shadows. One sound per person, two only for me. Orvek touched the bloodied cloth at his belt. The injured person was still west. I closed my mouth. The mystery could wait 30 seconds. I asked through gestures whether the fifth count would stop us from reaching the wounded person. Ivara touched the third, not on her wrist cord, held up one finger, pointed west. One scout could not decide. Before I could answer, 5 dry knocks came from behind the roots. Ivara's bow was up instantly. A section of root shifted inward. A beastkin man entered sideways. Lean, dark brown hair, small rounded ears, long sable tail. Mud dulled his gray clothes. A hooked spear in one hand, a flat stone marked with 5 pale cuts in the other. His eyes went to the water creature first. Not us. The count. The creature clicked 5 times. He stopped breathing for one beat, then looked at us. His gaze settled on me. I said that seemed unfair. I had not even introduced myself. Zer said I had introduced myself twice. He lived in my head. This might be his fault. Almina told us there was an armed stranger deciding whether I was one person or an infestation, and we should focus. The beastkin said his name, probably Tovin. Ivara gave a rapid report. Bellwire. Pursuit. Injured person west. Me and the blue-stained Claimwick thread. Tovin's ears flattened. He set up a counting system with pebbles. For visible bodies. He added a 5th beside my mark. I pointed at my chest, then at the extra stone, and shook my head. He did not remove it. He tested the creature with food. It ignored the meat entirely. Not hunger. Then he tested whether it counted hidden people. He sent Ivara out of sight behind the roots. The creature counted 3. She returned. 6. 2 for me again. Tovin's tail went still. I touched the mark beneath my eye, pointed at my shadow, shook my head, opened both hands. I had no better way to say I did not know either. I asked if either of them registered as a separate presence. Almina said we could not answer questions that would determine my interpretation of an active unknown. Tovin stared at me, arguing with the air. I said this was not helping my case. Instead of answering, he drew a circle around all 5 of us and cut a line toward a narrow crack on the north side. Quarantine. Ivara objected. Orvek stepped forward. Tovin struck his spear, but against the stone. Both stopped. He pointed to the creature, touched his own eyes, then drew 3 old tally marks and crossed each one. 3 past warnings. 3 times the count had mattered. Whatever the creature was, they trusted it more than a stranger's explanation. I could hardly call that irrational. The bell wire sounded again from the east. Closer. I held up both hands and pointed to myself and the northern crack, then to Orvek in west. Take him. Leave me in quarantine. Orvek grabbed my wrist and pulled it down. I said that was a proposal, not an order. He refused to release me. A branch cracked east of us. That ended the argument. Ivara cut her 3rd knot free and escalated to requiring a second witness. Together, the 2 scouts pulled aside a curtain of black roots. The creature entered first. Barney followed, giving me a look suggesting this was not leadership. I helped Orvek through. Tovin stayed behind long enough to scatter the pebbles into the stream, then knocked 5 times against a hollow root. A latch moved somewhere under the ferns. 5 knocks answered from the dark. The hidden latch lifted and warm air escaped. It smelled of boiled roots, wet cloth, and too many people sharing too little space. I had never been happier to smell bad soup. They made us surrender everything at the entrance. I laid my spear, water skin, and every loose stone on the shelf. Barney walked through without giving up anything. The passage opened into a low chamber held together by roots thicker than my waist. Ferns grew across the ceiling, filtering daylight into a dull green glow. No one had built a village there. They had built a process. A marked line divided arrivals from residents. 3 cots beside a water trough. Every newcomer was weighed, cleaned, examined, and given a colored cloth strip for the wrist. Blue for the cots, brown for storage, green through a western curtain. A black strip hung from an empty peg. No one wore one. I counted 14 people. Wood elves, beastkin, 2 high goblins, and 1 human man with gray at his temples. Tovin showed the 5-cut stone and held 2 fingers beside my face. The room changed. People stopped what they were doing and watched. I raised both hands and said I was beginning to miss the forest monsters. They said they tried to eat me. I said clear expectations. The human approached. Perhaps 40 lean, ink-stained hand, a burned scar across his throat. He pointed at himself. Edrin. Mateon. He repeated the name, then pointed at my left eye. The mark had begun to ache again. I touched it and shook my head. No explanation. Orvek shoved past Tovin. A second cot was hidden behind a blanket. A high goblin woman lay there, broad-shouldered, dark olive skin, 1 torn ear, bandage over her lower ribs already stained through. Orvek stopped beside her. His face broke. Raska! She did not wake. He touched 2 fingers to the cot instead of her skin. A beastkin healer pushed Orvek back and pointed at the floor. Seed. Stay out of the way. He obeyed faster than he had obeyed anyone. When the healer cut away part of Raska's bandage, Orvek gripped the cot until the wood creaked. I took 1 step forward. 3 weapons tracked me. I stopped. Ivara and Tovin presented their report to Edrin. Then Ivara produced the control seal plate. Every conversation died. Edrin pulled on leather gloves first. He pressed the plate into a wax bed on an iron frame device with 12 brass pins. One by one, the pins rose. 12. Edrin pointed at them, then at Orvek. Orvek grabbed charcoal and drew marks on the slate. 5 rows of 3, then 2 more. 17. Edrin's expression changed. I pointed at the 12 pins, then at 17 marks, and drew 5 empty circles. 5 prisoners not registered, hidden from the administration that claimed to own them. I asked why keep slaves off the record. Czar said for work the record could not admit. Almina said, or death's the record, did not wish to explain. Raska's breathing hitched. The healer barked orders, and 2 residents moved instantly. I noticed the water trough. The current had slowed. Mud darkened the intake screen. The healer needed clean water now. I pointed to the block screen, then to myself, and mimed clearing it by hand. No magic, just work. Ivara gave me the look she used when I did something stupid. I said I recognized that face. It lacked confidence in me. Czar said it had evidence. Almina sighed and said clear the water. I cleared the screen while Tovin watched my hands. Barney sat beside me, inspected the work, and yawned. I said he could help. He placed 1 paw on the clean end. Water ran clear into the healer's bowl. She gave me 1 brief nod. Not trust. A completed transaction. I prefer it to gratitude. Edrin turned the slate toward me again. 12 pins. 17 marks. 5 empty circles. He tapped the first circle and pointed to Raska. She had never existed in the labor registry. He tapped the other 4. For more prisoners still missing. I looked toward the sealed eastern passage. The camp had held 17. The administration admitted 12. 5 could be worked, moved, or killed without creating a single official absence. The refuge moved fast once they decided what I was. A woman cut a green cord in half and burned 1 piece to ash. The strip on my wrist did not grant access anywhere. It just recorded that I'd spent my route. My tally came off the hook, my bedroll got mixed with the common bundles, and I belonged nowhere. Not because anyone judged me guilty, because anyone who guided strangers through a restricted route became a possible road back to everyone inside. Then the committee formed. Ivara cut west and curved north. I drew the river split. She erased it. I redrew it. She erased it harder. Sir called it suffering with stationary. Mateon drew the formation. An eye at the front for Tovin, the path, Ivara, the black token with me. For himself, a hand holding the token and a second making notes. Barney scratched his paw beyond the front. Independent oversight. Then he sounded the charcoal. Ivara moved his mark. Barney moved it back. She moved it again. Both front paws on the slate. Sir called it a diplomatic deadlock. Mateon told him to stay out since he lacked paws. Almina ended the meeting with a snapped finger. Orvek rose and pointed at the western curtain. The healer blocked him. For people. His people. She pointed at Raska, then his damaged shoulder. 2 patients, whether he respected the arithmetic. Mateon drew Raska's torn ear, then an open eye above her cot. If she woke, she was their best witness. Someone had to stay who understood her signs. Orvek stared at the slate, then sat. Not defeated, assigned by his own decision. He pushed his stone knife toward Mateon, who said giving it back would not improve the craftsmanship. Orvek's mouth twitched. Mateon took it. Supplies came with the generosity of people who expected to need everything tomorrow. 1 lamp, route cord, 2 chalk sticks for mushroom cakes, a half-filled water skin. Tovin divided the cakes. The 4th went into a shared pouch instead of Barney's mouth. Barney stared like the pouch had insulted his family. Mateon said it was a budget, not persecution. The healer gave Mateon cloth for his foot. He said he had been promoted to 1 boot and 1 government-funded disagreement with the ground. Czar said the ground retained ownership. Ivara returned his spear, tested the head, took it away, gave him chalk. Czar said he had been armed with accounting. We left through the western curtain. The refuge did not watch us go. I looked back once. The black strip stayed visible against my wrist. Then Ivara turned me west. We moved in a narrow line. Tovin and Barney ranged ahead. I carried the lamp unlit. Mateon kept the token wrapped and used chalk only where Ivara approved. At the river split, I pointed at the lower watercourse. Ivara pointed uphill. Mateon crouched and found 3 boot marks in wet silt. Square heels, regular spacing. Someone walked here recently without hiding it. Dunins, or people pretending to be them. He marked Ivara's higher path with a half-sun. Slower but hidden, I tapped the half-sun, then the token, held up 2 fingers. The gate would not accept the token for 2 more measures. We had time. The higher path cost 12 minutes and Mateon's patience with his foot wrap. It brought us above the arches without crossing the exposed bank. The hollow choir lay below. 3 old stone arches cut into the hillside, a channel beneath the lowest, black root veins through the masonry. No guards, no prisoners, built to move things unseen. Tovin touched a claw to a pale scratch in the stone. Tick! The sound vanished. A heartbeat later, the same note from high above. Tovin did not move. Barney's fur rose. Then the stone answered, closer. Not an echo. Something inside had heard us arrive. The first missing prisoner was breathing 10 steps away. The other 4 existed as charcoal circles on my slate. 5 people kept outside the official count. Not an accident. Someone had needed them invisible. I pointed at the circles and drew a line around them. Same group. I reached for the slate. A wood elf caught my wrist. I pulled my sleeve up and showed the faded mark on my forearm. 3 columns beneath a ring of squares. The same geometry as the control seal plate. Someone cursed. Tovin's ears flattened. Ivara stepped between me and the exit. Mateon said I had worked for them. Sir called it an excellent deduction. I drew a building, a desk, a small army behind it. Rows. Names. Seals. A registrar. I tapped my throat scar, then drew a door, a running figure, 3 arrows. Former registrar. The mark did not surprise the refuge. They knew enough to distrust me, but not throw me out. I had been living inside a verdict no one wanted to finish. The healer snapped her fingers. Everyone stopped. I held the plate above a lamp until the wax softened. A seam appeared. I slid a thin black shard from inside. Ceramic, no longer than Mateon's finger. One face had a wagon wheel. The other had 5 notches and a symbol like an open mouth crossed by 3 lines. I offered it to Mateon. Ivara caught my wrist. He said no. I pushed it into his palm. The system identified it as a Dunin auxiliary transfer token. Rank F, active but limited. It verified unregistered labor transfers and confirmed 5 subjects. Destination encoded. A route table was required for interpretation, which was the magical equivalent of a form requiring another form requiring a 3rd form nobody had. Mateon turned the shard. 5 notches. 5 bodies removed from the ledger. Crime with inventory control. Orvek saw the cross-mouth symbol and stood so fast the cot shifted. Raska made a broken sound. He froze, apologized, then took the charcoal. 5 figures. The first had Raska's torn ear. The second broad and short. The third with long arms. the fourth with a face mark, the fifth narrow beneath a hood. All adults. He drew an ear beside each, tapped the table 5 times, pointed toward the stone beneath their feet. They heard something. He struck the table. A faint answer returned from inside the root wall, chosen because they could hear the answer. I added tunnel arches to the slate. The cross mouth symbol beneath. A black shape with hooked wings above. Barney's fur lifted. He slapped Matean's ankle with his tail. Raska's hand moved. Her eyes opened halfway, found the shard in Matean's palm. She spoke 3 rough words. The second sounded like choir. I repeated it. Hollow choir. Her fingers closed around his wrist. Weak grip, strong warning. She tapped 4 times and pointed west. The healer pushed him back. For people. West. Alive when Raska last saw them. A large beeskin drew a line through the circles and pointed around the refuge. For lives against everyone inside. Ivara did not stop him. Neither did Tovin. Matean drew an eye beside the circles, a road from the hollow choir, the Dunan seal at the end. Find first. Fight only if the facts allowed it. I erased his road and redrew it north. Marked the river split, 3 arches, a narrow opening. A half-sun sinking below a line. Dusk. Orvek mimed a gate opening. The transfer route opened at dusk. I took the black wrist strip and tied it around my own wrist. Permission. Trust. The right to leave by an ordinary route. No one tried to stop me. Worse than an argument. I placed 1 finger on a map and looked at Matean. I would show them the way. We spent the afternoon reaching safety. Now safety had given us a deadline. The 4 missing prisoners were scheduled to move at dusk. The third tick died against stone, and no one moved. Tovin's claw stayed against the scratch. Barney beside him, back-arched, every hair raised. The channel continued under the arch like nothing answered from 2 places. Ivara lifted 1 finger. Wait. I held the lamp, still unlit. Matean listened. Water over stone. A drop. Nothing repeated it. Zur said most listening was selective. Almina said neither was as quiet as they believed. Tovin tapped twice, paused once. The answer came from the highest arch with the same rhythm. Then from the water channel below. Ivara marked the stone. 2 lines. Not an echo. Something throwing sound through the passages. Or several listeners. Matean drew and I crossed out. It could hear us. We did not know if it could see us. Tovin nodded. Matean tied the knife to the route cord. Ivara caught his wrist. He pointed at the arch, then dragged 2 fingers sideways. Noise there. People elsewhere. I studied the blade, reconsidering every decision involving his craftsmanship. He said it survived a rabbit. Zar said at last, a regulation on humor. Tovin climbed above the 3rd arch. Ivara pointed me toward the lower gate. Matean stayed with Barney behind the 1st arch. He swung the cord. Clack. He pulled. The rhythm followed deeper. Clack. Farther. Clack. Higher. Clack. Tovin dropped beside the gate. Ivara reached me. Matean ran crouched across the channel. No attack. That did not make the plan good. Only unfinished. The gate was dark stone with 5 shallow holes beside a slot. I unwrapped the token. Wagon wheel up. 5 notches down. I looked less like a guide than a man outside an old office. I drew figures in the dirt and moved them through the arch. I had done this before. Somewhere like it. Matean touched the strip on my wrist, then the token. Past and present. Not erased. Not identical. I pushed the shard in. 1 hole opened. I pressed my thumb. The 2nd. By the 4th, sweat my temple. The 5th opened last. I did not touch it. 5 prisoners supposed to answer. Matean pulled the cord. The knife struck stone. Something answered with a perfect knock. Kook. The 5th hole closed. The gate sank. Dust breathed from the seam. Matean said he counted that as a partial success. Zar said the listener had been registered as a prisoner. Almina said enter before the interpretation closed. We slipped under. The chamber had 5 iron rings, a stone bench, numbered wax squares with 2 scraped away. Tovin stepped past the threshold. Barney bit his trouser leg, then pressed a paw against a thin black root crossing the floor. 2 straight. It led to a drilled hole. Ivara followed it to 3 bone pieces beneath the bench. 1 step and a warning for every passage. Tovin removed his foot and touched 2 fingers to Barney. I cut the root without touching the bones. I lit the lamp. No prisoners. No guards. Fresh mud beneath 3 rings. One restraint hung open, leather dark with blood. Ivara found blue-gray cloth behind a broken hook. The hooded prisoner's hood. Wet at one end. Not rain. Tobin smelled it. Recent. I drew 4 figures moving deeper. 1 guard. Another line crossing. I added a desk and my old forearm mark. I had seen marks like these from the safe side. Maybe counting was not the same as choosing. I scraped the desk away until the charcoal broke. Mateon handed me the second chalk stick. A scrape from ahead. Barney stepped toward it. Mateon caught his collar. Barney looked over one shoulder with deep offense. Mateon said file a complaint later. Ivara checked left. Tobin right. I raised the lamp. Mateon checked behind us. Empty. The scrape stopped. Only the lamp hissed. Then his own voice came from beneath the bench. Barney, stay. Everyone stopped being offended. The words came from beneath the bench. Barney, stay. No one answered. Ivara pointed at each of us and drew a line through the air. No voices. The copied voice moved to the left passage. Then Mateon heard himself on the right. Come here. Softer than anything he had said since entering. It selected the words meant for Barney. Mateon asked if identity theft applied to voices. Czar said only for profit. Almina said it stole the shape, not the part Barney trusted. He asked if that was reassurance. She said correction. Czar said gentle. She said continue, and she would demonstrate less gentle. Mateon crouched by the bench. The wall behind it had tiny holes drilled at an angle, hidden by dust. I went still and mimed a guard speaking into the wall. Whisper channels. Orders traveling without opening doors. A gray film covered the nearest hole. It tightened when he breathed near it. He brought the knife toward it. Almina said not to put his hand there. He said his hand was attached. Temporary design flaw. The film snapped inward. Something shot through, struck the knife, opened his palm, and vanished. Barney caught the cord in his teeth. His arm stopped before following the blade in. Ivara dragged him back. Less than a breath. Blood between his fingers. Almina said close it. Zer said she worries. She said she was preserving the only body available. Mateon thought that romantic. She said bleed more and she might recover objectivity. More familiar. I wrapped his palm. He whispered yes before remembering the rule. For heads turned. His copied whisper repeated from the right passage. I drew a mouth in the dust and crossed it out. Tovin dusted the holes and tapped the wall. 3 holes breathed at different times. The listener was deeper inside. He inserted a twig. It bent left. The next bent right. 2 routes. I drew the room as a square with 2 exits. Above the left for cuts. Above the right, a hooked symbol. Ivara pointed. I nodded. Prisoner transfer. She pointed at the hook. I dragged a finger across my throat and pointed down. Bodies. Waste. People not returning. The right passage produced my cough. The exact one from the outer gate. No one looked right. Ivara set up a touch system. 3 dots. 3 presses on each shoulder. 3 touches meant real instruction required contact. Czar set a law he supported. We entered the left passage, single file. Copied voices shifted position around us. I heard my breath from behind us. Mateon heard his footsteps in the right wall. The passage narrowed around a pillar. Something pale folded away above it. Mateon caught pieces. A membrane, a hook joint, a dark eye before it withdrew. Tovin threw his knife. Stone. Stolen sounds exploded through the tunnels. Bark, inhale, laugh, knocks, all stacked until direction meant nothing. The shape unfolded above Tovin. Dark membrane between jointed fingers. The edge snapped toward his ear. Ivara shoved him down. The membrane clung to the wall, ridges producing stolen sounds. Come here. Cough. Tick. Tick. Mateon threw the cord around a joint and pulled. His cut opened. Something pulled back. Not enough to drag him. Enough to learn. Tovin drove his knife into the shadow. I cut the cord. The fingers vanished. That clicking retreated. No blood. Just a clear smear. Almina said shorter steps with the left foot. He asked if she had been watching. She said watching him fail to walk quietly. He decided surviving was safer than examining that. I flinched right. Mateon tapped my shoulder 3 times. Real. I steadied. Barney scratched at the pillar base. Blue-gray thread around a rusted nail. The hooded prisoner's cloth. Ivara pointed left. For cuts. Fresh scrape. Left. A gong sounded inside the hill. Dust fell. I pulled out the token. A red line along its edge was shrinking. The route was closing. From the right tunnel, Matean's voice called. For prisoners. This way. Barney bared his teeth. Then 5 knocks from the left. The 5th weak enough to be falling stone. Ivara pointed left. Tovin pointed right. I stared at the dying line. Mateon raised his hand. A scream tore through the right passage. It stopped halfway. The scream died halfway through. Mateon counted the silence. 3 heartbeats later, the right tunnel gave back the last broken note. Not an echo. Something had carried it, held it, and released it. The scream could be real and still be bait. He drew the junction in the dust. 5 marks on the left, 1 on the right. He split the route cord into 2 loops. Tovin shook his head, because splitting inside a place that stole directions was an excellent method of producing 2 smaller groups of corpses. Mateon added a line between both loops. Short search, fixed return. Tovin pointed right. 5 people could be weak. 1 person could be dying. Zer called it a fine administrative principle. I was saving whoever had the shortest deadline. Almina cut through us. My token was closing, and so was the wound under my bandage. Blood again. I pointed right. Ivara caught my coat and made a cutting motion across the route cord. If the cord was severed, we returned immediately. She pointed at Barney. Barney pointedly looked away. Ivara tied the shorter loop around my belt. 3 hard taps from Edrin. Return. Tovin gave Barney one look that meant keep him alive. Barney answered with a stare that meant he had already noticed everyone else was incompetent. We entered the right passage. The tunnel copied our steps, half a breath late. Something had learned the sound, not the movement. Like a co-worker who memorized your catchphrases but has no idea what your job is. The passage descended. Barney stopped at the 3rd no-return symbol. His nose moved once. He looked up. A dark cord lay against the ceiling, trembling under tension. I pointed at it. Ivara caught my wrist. Look, do not touch. We rounded the bend. A woman hung sideways behind a waist-high iron grate, one ankle locked in a wooden brace. The ceiling cord ended at that brace. Every time it tightened, her injured leg lifted against the joint. The creature did not need to fake the first scream. It only needed a pull. Ivara tested the grate. Rusted iron, swollen rootwood. The woman was still breathing. Something was waiting for rescuers. Barney touched her sleeve through the bars. Her eyes opened. Fear. Human. I moved my knife away from the bars so she could see it. Then the ceiling cord snapped tight. Her body jerked. Ivara cut at the cord, but the fibers separated into wet strands. Not rope. Membrane. The rootwood around the hinge was swollen. I pointed at it. For mana. Ivara tapped my shoulder 3 times. Real permission. Druid extraction answered. The wood cracked and shrank. Pain struck behind my eyes. Almina told me to stop at 4. She also pointed out I had planned not to touch the wall. The hinge dropped. Ivara drove her knife beneath it. The grate opened. The membrane line whipped down. I ducked. It wrapped around the bars. Tiny ridges opened along it. The woman's scream came from the membrane itself. Real pain, recorded and reused. Like a voicemail from someone actively being murdered. Ivara cut the ankle brace. I caught the woman while Barney tore at the line. I told him to stay. He bit harder. We pulled the prisoner into the passage. She pointed behind the grate. 3 cuts in the stone. Route marks. 3 more prisoners deeper. The cord jerked twice. Edrin's signal. Time. We reached the junction as the red line on his token narrowed to a scratch. Tovin had forced the left gate open. 5 knocks from the other side. Someone was listening. Both routes had been true. Both had been traps. Edrin saw the woman and went pale. One of the 4 missing prisoners. I showed him the 3 carved cuts. The woman spoke a word in a language I did not know. Barney froze. His ears turned toward the ceiling. I felt the route cord lift. Not pull. Lift. 5 hooked joints detached from the stone above Edrin. The stolen voices counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The first hooked limb dropped. The hooked wing had not reached the nearest captive when I drove the broken spear into its path. The wing folded around the shaft and kept coming. The creature used it as a handle and yanked me off my feet. My shoulder hit stone and the shaft slid away. The captive knocked 5 times. Every ridge on the creature's chest opened, and every stolen voice answered at once. Water. Please. Open the door. Barney, stay. The sound hit from every wall. Tovin dropped to his knees. Even Barney flattened. The wing stopped half a handspan from the captive. I pushed up and said chest. My own voice came back from behind me. The monster's head tilted. Ivara drove her knife into the nearest open ridge. The creature convulsed, and the wing tore the captive's binding. He fell. Tovin caught him. 1 down, 2 still hanging. The creature pulled fully into view. Longer than a horse, narrow through the ribs, wings lined with hooks. No eyes. A crown of cartilage rings surrounded the throat, each trembling toward a different sound. The system named it Hollow Choir Masterbat. Level 18. Rank D. Borrowed sound, echo mapping, sound understanding. My combat plan involved half a spear, a borrowed knife, a wounded scout, a clerk, a cat dog with authority problems, and a doorway held by a severed limb. I had worked with worse committees. The throat rings turned. A heartbeat came from a wall. The second captive's heartbeat. A hooked limb shot toward her. I threw myself between them. The hook stopped against the metal clasp from my ruined coat. Pain flashed from palm to elbow. Barney hit the limb from below. Tovin joined him. The limb opened a child's scream in their faces. Tovin recoiled. Barney did not. He bit until the membrane tore. The limb fell limp. The master bat opened every ridge along its ribs. I yelled down. Too late. Years of stolen sound poured out. Chains dragged over stone. Someone laughing. Someone begging. A woman saying a name with such tenderness it hurt more than the volume. The blast drove thought from my head. I hit the floor. White swallowed everything. Not light. Noise. Something warm touched my face. 3 taps. Barney. I opened my eyes. Ivara on one knee, blood from one ear. Tovin over the first captive. Edrin pressed forehead to forehead with the hooded woman, so neither could be lured. The master bat moved slowly now. Membranes collapsed. The body dragged like the sound had emptied it. A cost. The creature had one too. The resonance crown coordinated everything. Disruption would cause loss of routing and uncontrolled release. Severe risk to nearby hearing. 5 mana. I pointed to the crown and rotated my fist. Break the coordinator. Tovin took the left wing. Barney the right. Edrin could not fight. He could change the room. He struck 5 knocks on the stone. The creature's crown turned. The ridges twitched. It dragged itself toward the gate. Away from the captives. Tovin attacked. Barney seized. Ivara climbed using hooked ribs as holds. The master bat released an order in Orvek's voice. Fear disguised as command. Barney hesitated. I struck my chest 3 times. Real. Barney pulled harder. Ivara reached the crown. A hook unfolded beneath her. Almina said behind you. Ivara could not hear. I could. I looped the route cord around the spearhead and pulled. The hook missed her spine by less than a finger. It entered my coat and dragged me across the floor. Ivara drove her knife between 2 rings. The crown screamed. Not the creature. The crown itself. The largest ring whispered, "Please don't make me forget." Ivara froze. The master bat threw her off. Barney stood alone beneath its throat. The creature spoke in my voice. Come here. The command was perfect, but I had never used that tone with him. Both his eyes narrowed. He stepped forward. The creature opened its jaw. Barney leaped past it and struck the knife handle in the crown. The blade twisted. 3 rings broke. The creature lost every direction. Limbs attacked the walls. Voices poured from the torn crown. I tore free and drove the broken ashwood through the gap. Ivara's hand closed over mine. Tovin's over hers. We pushed. The central ring split. Silence. Then the gate shifted. We moved. Tovin lifted the first captive. Ivara cut the second free. I reached the third, a thin adult with short horns. The restraint had grown into the wall. Root, not leather. Druid extraction. 6 mana. Ivara cut through it. We ran. Barney barked. The dead master bat answered with the same bark. Weak, but not empty. I stopped. Almina said I was bleeding from 3 places. I said 2.5. She said that was not a unit. I looked at the shattered crown. Sound, understanding. The ability to separate meaning from noise. What I had needed since meeting Barney. I slid back under the gate. Ivara caught my sleeve. I pointed at the crown, at Barney, at my ear. Her grip tightened, then released. One chance. Druid extraction. The pattern entered at 1,000 unfinished sounds trying to become one thought. Sound understanding, rank C. Direct acquisition rejected. Incompatible sensory structure. But I could archive it. 14 mana. Warning about distortion and memory intrusion. I accepted. Every stolen voice passed through me. A mother. A guard. A prisoner. A child. Orvek. Ivara. My own voice. Then Barney's bark rose above the rest. Not words. Not yet. But I heard my name inside it. Pattern archived. Unstable. 14 mana spent. 39 left. Hand seized my coat. Ivara and Tovin dragged me under the gate as the hook snapped. Stone slammed shut. The borrowed voices did not stop. They were inside me now. One whispered in a language I had never learned. And my mind almost understood it. The voice inside my left ear finished a sentence my mind had no right to recognize. Not the words. The shape of them. A warning. A name. Then 20 other voices pushed through. I staggered. Tovin caught my shoulder. Barney barked at my shin. The bark arrived twice. First as sound, then as meaning. Pain. Anger. Stay awake. I pressed my palm over my ear. A dead woman whispered I was lying. A child laughed. Orvek begged someone to run. None were present. The pattern was still sorting everything, assigning meaning whether I wanted it or not. Like a spam filter convinced every email was personal. Almina said that was the failure. Her voice cut through because it did not enter through my ears. The source heard a pattern and declared what it meant without confidence grading. Zer called it a confident mistake. Popular in government. Another foreign sentence hit me with grief, so strong my knees nearly folded. Barney struck my leg 3 times. Real. The corridor was barely wide enough for us. For rescued. 3 injured companions. 1 unstable pattern. No safe route. I told Edrin to count everyone, injuries first. Tovin to listen for movement. Ivara, anyone who stopped breathing interrupted everything, including me. The system warned instability was increasing. Estimated time before severe bleed unknown. Helpful as always. I asked if it could be destroyed. Almina said yes. Zer said no. It had already used my memories as reference material. Removing it could take language, faces, or my ability to separate Barney from a poorly folded blanket. Barney growled. The pattern supplied a meaning. Insulted. I told him that one was accurate. I pictured a registry desk. Statements did not become facts because someone spoke them. They needed a source, a category, a confidence level. I said we would redesign the process. Intake, source separation, pattern comparison, then an output that admitted when it did not know. Zer asked if I wished to make ignorance a feature. I said I wished to stop calling guesses knowledge. Almina said good. Quiet enough, I almost missed it. Zer called me generous. I told him to keep talking and get silence instead. I cut routes in the pattern. Human speech from animal calls. Living voices from stored echoes. Certainty from probability. The pattern resisted. It was born in a predator that decided what a sound meant before its prey could move. I refused it. No forced conclusion. A foreign voice became static. No unidentified source presented as familiar. The dead woman's whisper lost my mother's warmth. No translation without confidence. Pain lanced behind my eyes. The pattern folded inward. The system offered a restructuring. Sound and language engineer, rank F, separate living sound from stored echoes. Identify emotional intent. Build limited vocabulary. Display uncertainty instead of forcing false meaning. No literacy, no mind reading, crowds could cause overload. 8 mana. I accepted. Every breath became a separate person for one terrible second. Tovin's inhale carried pain. Ivara's exhale carried the intention to hit me if I stopped responding. Barney's growl was an entire argument. Then the noise passed through my structure. Intake, source, pattern, confidence, output. A useful silence returned. Barney stared up, ears flat. He barked once. A rough male voice formed. Older than I expected. Dry enough to sandwood. You reckless, long-legged idiot. I told him he sounded older. He barked again. He looked worse. Zar laughed so hard the halo tilted. I asked if he had understood me the whole time. He sat. Yes. Had he let me keep guessing? I guessed badly. That was not a defense. It entertained him. Ivara pointed at her eyes. I said I could understand him now. Barney said she should have tied me to the wall before I touched the crown. Ivara nodded immediately. Traitor, I told him. Survivor, he said. Level 1 to level 2. Maximum mana up to 102. All stats increased. But no healing. My arm still hurt. The channels just felt like a larger cup, mostly empty. Almina said I had improved, but was not rewarded with the right to ignore damage. The concern beneath her correction was small and hidden. I noticed anyway. She guided me through a breathing technique. Measure mana breathing. 6% progress. Tovin raised one hand. A distant metallic sound through the wall. Tick, tick, not the master bat. The skill marked it as living movement with metal. Barney listened. 6, maybe 7. Coming toward us. One smelled like the prison chains. Edrin held up 9 fingers. 5 rescuers. For prisoners. 9 people who could not fight another battle. I set a new rule. Nobody separated. Nobody answered a familiar voice. Nobody left without being counted. Barney barked. Finally, an intelligent order. The first hook had not reached Edrin when I pulled. The cord snapped tight. Edrin's feet left the floor, and the hook struck where his neck had been. Stone burst across the junction. All 5 limbs turned toward the sound. Not toward Edrin. Ivara shoved the hooded prisoner into a recess. Tovin kept one forearm wedged in the gate. Barney launched beneath the sweep, teeth on the membrane behind the hook. The limb jerked upward with him hanging from it. I yelled his name from 3 places at once. Barney dropped before the hooks converged on the copy. I stopped speaking. Zer did not. Almina said left. I ducked. A hook lifted my hair. The junction was too small for 5 striking limbs. Should have helped. Did not. The creature used the tunnels as ears and limbs as separate hands. Like a manager delegating blame through 5 Slack channels. Edrin's token slipped and rang. 3 hooks snapped toward it. The 4th struck at the copied clink from a wall. The 5th stayed above the gate. Real sound entered the stone. Then half a heartbeat later the choir released a copy. Limbs attacked both, original first, copy second. I pointed at the token and made an opening motion. Make it speak. Edrin struck it against the wall. A strip along the 4th limb peeled open, ridges like wet teeth. The joint froze while the ridges vibrated. Ivara cut the exposed membrane. 1 hit. Not enough. The other 4 answered. A cough. A child crying. My voice saying stay. 5 knocks from behind the gate. People who were not there. Tovin's eyes flicked at the knocks. Barney struck his ankle, tapped 3 times. Real. I pointed at everyone, touched my throat, crossed 2 fingers. No voices. I tapped the stone, pointed to Ivara's cut. Sound. Release. Stillness. Strike. She nodded. Edrin did not. The token's red line had almost vanished. If he lost it, the gate closed on 3 prisoners. I held out my hand. He looked at the hooded woman. He looked through the gate at the darkness. He placed the token in my hand. Not obedience. A decision. I tied the cord through the token's ring. A hook dropped without warning and cut my upper arm. I hit the ground on one knee. The token swung. Every hook turned. I threw it into the right whisper channel. The first limb chased the real sound. Half a heartbeat later, the second opened its ridges to copy the clink. Ivara cut. Tovin drove both claws into the exposed joint. Barney bit where membrane met cartilage. The limb could not pivot while speaking. That was the rule. I rammed the spear beneath the joint. Edrin struck the wall 5 times. 5 membranes opened. 5 joints stopped. I pushed. The spear cracked. The limb tore free. The other 4 came alive. One caught the token. Another closed over it. The didn't transfer token folded in half. Its red line went dark. The gate began to descend. Tovin caught it with both hands. Barney dragged the severed limb. The hook was heavy enough to hold the door. Edrin and Barney shoved it under the falling gate. Cartilage wedged between stone and rootwood. The gate stopped with less than a man's height remaining. The severed limb twitched beneath the gate, leaking sound. A cough. Half a prayer. The creature had carried pieces of its prisoners. A remaining limb raked Tovin's forearm. Barney snapped it back. The system partially identified the pattern. A limb emitting sound had to stabilize its joint and expose the membrane. No skidgand, a rule bought with blood, and our only transfer token. I rose. My arm burned, but my hand worked. Ivara pressed on the cut. I pointed at the gate. Almina told me to stop the bleeding. I said we had 3 people behind that gate. She said I would not improve their chances by leaving pieces of myself in every corridor. Surrounded by compassion. Surrounded by poor decisions. Ivara bound my arm. I did not complain, mostly because the ceiling moved. The stone above the left passage had never been stone. A body peeled away. A ribbed wing broad enough to cover the gate. A torso wrapped in dark membranes. Dozens of ridges opened along its chest. Every stolen voice inhaled at once. The 4 remaining limbs withdrew. Not retreating, rejoining. Beyond the gate, 3 shapes hung from the walls. One knocked 5 times. The creature turned toward them. Tovin forced himself onto the gate. Ivara shifted the rescued woman to Edrin. Barney squeezed through. I took the broken spear. The source body crawled toward the captives. One hooked wing reached for the nearest prisoner. I ducked beneath the gate. This time, we knew when it could not move. Barney's nose twitched toward the eastern passage. 7 bodies. 6 walking like they owned themselves, 1 dragged by a chain. My skill picked up the rhythm, every 3rd step interrupted by metal against skin. A voice called for a team count. 6 answers. The chained one didn't answer. I muttered 6 of them, thought the total was 15. Barney said I'd been understanding him 4 minutes and was already doing arithmetic. I told him it was a difficult separation between his insults and useful information. I crouched by the wall and drew a chalk line, asked Edrin for what the prison records when people can't move. He knelt with shaking knees and added 4 marks. Breathing, bleeding, walking identity. I assigned cloth strips as markers, 1 knot for walkable, 2 for support, 3 for carrying, cross knot for bleeding. Ivara tied a cross knot around my arm and another around my injured hand. I said that felt excessive. She reached for my throat. 2 was a respected administrative limit. Almina said I'd invented it because I disliked the evidence. I returned to the prisoners before she could improve my classification. Edrin checked their wrists. 3 had transfer bands with serial marks. The blue-gray hooded woman wore a 4th, scraped blank. Edrin rubbed 2 fingers together like erasing ink. Removed from the registry. Not missing from the count. Removed from it. The leader's voice got clearer. 3 recoverable transfers. 1 null record. 5 intruders. Recover 3. Dispose of 1. Edrin found a narrow service hatch. A drain inspection route. I organized a movement list. Tovin first, Ivara with the walking woman, Edrin supporting Blue Hood, Barney between the groups, me taking the horn captive. Barney's tail snapped. I was taking the heaviest person while bleeding from everywhere. He noted I'd started using fractions for wounds. Tovin slipped through. The retrieval team stopped on the other side of the bend. A voice spoke in a language I'd never heard. Blood. 9. Near. The chain tracker had found us. Tovin tapped 3 times. Clear. We moved. I looped belts beneath the horned captive as a sling. My left arm burned. Almina told me to put them down. We had less than a minute. She said use it intelligently. I shifted the weight to my hips. I didn't thank her. She didn't ask. Barney refused to enter the hatch. The tracker's breathing got closer. A thin figure appeared at the bend, collar fixed to a pole. Fur along the jaw, 1 torn ear. Our eyes met. Behind them, The leader said report tool. Not a name. A category. I pointed at the tracker. 7. At the 6 armed figures. 6. At the tracker again. 7. The tracker slowly raised one hand and pointed away from the hatch toward the resonance gate. Blood, many there. The leader shoved them forward. All 7 passed. Only 6 pairs of boots got counted. Barney entered last. We were coming back for that one. I said yes. The drain route forced us onto hands and knees in cold water. Behind us, the retrieval leader found the chalk register and asked what idiot counted null. I whispered it was an accurate one. The system chimed. I'd established a living person count under threat, detected a registry exclusion, and preserved uncertainty instead of inventing data. New skill, administrative survey, rank F. Build a local registry from observation. Mark excluded entries. Compare resources within a defined area. No truth detection, no remote knowledge. Cost 2 mana. My mana sat at 29 over 102. My first real administrative skill, acquired while crawling through sewage. Public service had preserved its dignity. We emerged beside a trade road. 9 of us, no one missing. A toll shelter stood next to a wrecked medicine wagon. The tollkeeper called 9 travelers, road fee 9 copper. I looked at my empty hands. Barney said my treasury remained impressive. The driver kicked the broken wheel and the axle split. The tollkeeper looked from the wreck to us. No coin? Then earn the road. I looked at the medicine crates sinking into mud and the 4 rescued prisoners who could barely stand. Terms first. The wagon driver said her cargo was spoiling. I told her she needed a fast agreement more than an argument afterward. Barney announced I had no money, no boots, and 1 administrative skill, and had become difficult to employ. The tollkeeper said, lift the wagon, clear the road. He'd waive the toll. I asked what happened if another bottle broke. The driver stepped in. Pre-existing damage stayed hers. New damage from negligence came from the fee. 2 bronze if the medicine reached South Way House before the second night bell. For the job, not per worker. 2 bronze for emergency salvage was urgency wearing a smaller number. I laid it out. Toll waived as labor credit. For injured road, the repaired wagon. She provided tools, rope, 1 treatment bundle. Payment 2 bronze 40 copper, fixed. The driver said I negotiated like a clerk. I negotiated like someone who planned to be paid. The tollkeeper couldn't erase 9 travelers. I said enter it as emergency maintenance labor. That was for registered crews. Edrin pointed to a line at the bottom of the page. Temporary hazard response. Witness discretion. His expression suggested he disliked Edrin for having eyes. I added the axle failed at his culver's shoulder. Record that too. A memory surfaced. A university report on Earth. Reduced waiting times. Online access for everyone. Everyone with a phone. Everyone who could read the form. Everyone who could argue after the system rejected them. Technically open, practically closed. A road could be private and still be a public necessity when there was no other route for medicine. The tollkeeper said his family repaired this stretch. I said there was a reason to collect tolls, not to pretend the rut was unrelated to the wagon inside it. Celadorn, courier. Nearest Tav, tollkeeper. I gave just my name. Sella looked at Barney, who called himself a senior financial advisor. She didn't understand him. I did, unfortunately. Terms written, read back, sealed. I marked the page and wondered if signatures felt less ridiculous when a person owned shoes. I opened the new skill. For needed transport, 3 workers injured, 1 courier with wagon knowledge, 1 tollkeeper with tools. 17 crates. A jack, runners, wedges, rope. Cost 3 mana. The truth was simple. We didn't need to repair the wagon. We needed to move its cargo 2 miles before rain ruined everything. Nearest had oak runners for dragging culvert blocks. Curved, iron-banded, already paid for by road fees. Edrin lifted the ledger. Exactly as recorded. Barney said Nearest had expressed admiration for my family line. I tried lifting a crate with my left arm. Almina told me to put it down. On Earth, I'd waited for permission while others moved flood barriers. Here I'd answer that shame by reaching for every weight. That wasn't leadership. It was making one person the bottleneck. I lowered the crate. The rescued man, who Katai said one knot was all he could give. He tied 6. Barney found a crate that smelled wrong. Cracked bottle leaking toward feverroot powder. Sella separated them. She treated Ivara's ear, Tovin's arm, and my palm. No charge. Contract. That word felt better than charity. We laid the runners under the wagon bed. The first lift failed. The bed slid toward the ditch with a horned captive in its path. Left wedge. Tovin kicked one under the runner. Ivara pulled the captive. I threw my weight against the frame. The wedge caught. The wagon stopped a handspan from the broken horn. Sella called it new damage. I said, shaking, it was prevented damage. Second lift worked. We loaded cargo, put the prisoners under canvas, and Sella took the mule's lead. Nearest planted a red hazard stake. Not a repair. An admission repair was needed. Southway House before the second night bell. The clerk said unregistered labor got 60%. Sella placed the toll ledger copy down. Fixed emergency contract. The clerk read it twice. A good contract kept fighting after its writers got tired. 2 bronze and 40 copper hit the counter. My first money in Garrick looked disappointingly ordinary. I counted it aloud for all 9 and declared a temporary common fund. Treatment, food, travel first. Review the rest in daylight. The system chimed. Administrative survey proficiency went to 2.7%. Then a warning. A recorded agreement remained only as fair as access, comprehension, enforcement, and appeal. Across the road, a second-hand stall displayed a pair of tall, ugly boots. Both the same size. Barney congratulated me on acquiring money and an immediate opportunity to spend it all on basic dignity. The boots were still hanging across the road when the blue-gray hood woman started breathing too fast. I noticed the stall first. I hated that. Then her shoulders jerked and the treatment room beat every piece of clothing I owned. We moved her onto a table. The healer held a copper disc near her mouth. Mist clouded it. Too shallow, maybe fever. Name? No confirmed name. The clerk said no name, no treatment entry. The healer said she could treat a body without a name, but he couldn't charge one. Barney said from under the table that the sentence contained a problem. Only I understood him. Row medicine was subsidized for residents and registered couriers. Unknown persons paid full rate. I said she was an accident victim. Which accident? I glanced at the bruises around her wrists. The one that kept records badly. Her eyes opened for 1 second. Don't write a name. I'll lower myself so she could see me. I wouldn't. I told the clerk to open a service marker. Blue-gray 1. Description, time, witnesses, no claim of identity. She said that was still a record. Yes, one that said she received medicine, not one that said who owned her. She watched me long enough for my knees to complain, then nodded. We gathered around a low table. Edrin put the money down. 9 people, for rescued, 3 injured rescuers, 1 former clerk, and 1 dog cat who could offer opinions but not hold coin. Barney corrected cat dog. I ignored him. The knocking man said we hadn't earned the money. The blue-gray woman's voice came from the doorway. Neither had they. A memory rose. A scholarship committee on Earth. A girl with excellent marks who'd fallen below the cutoff because her attendance suffered. The model measure merit, but not who'd been given time to display it. I said surviving captivity wasn't a wage. Equal shares? Not yet. Equal coins didn't create equal access when one person needed fever medicine and another needed breakfast. The blue-gray woman asked who decided need. That was the correct question. I said not me alone. Edrin drew 4 columns on the cargo copy. Emergency expense, protected reserve, route reserve, operational advance. We allocated together. 36 for treatment, 18 for food, 9 for blankets, 80 protected for the rescued prisoners, 45 for the road, 52 as an advance for my clothing and boots, repayable later. Total exact. The blue-gray woman objected to me controlling the advance. Ivara became its keeper. 5 rolls for 52 copper. Absurd, but safer. The system chimed. Verified growth. 4 recovered from detention. 9 evacuated. Labor completed under terms. Income protected. Resources allocated with representation. Level 2 to 3. Max mana up to 118. Usable max to 111. All stats increased by 1 each. Level growth had not restored mana or repaired injuries. I waited for warmth or fewer blisters. My foot kept hurting. Barney said I remained badly dressed. I noticed that too. The stall opened at first light. The pair had spotted hung in the center. Tall brown leather, resold. To the right, polished black boots with a quiet scale, certified tag, 48 copper. I pointed to the center pair. 34. Roadworthy, resold once. No certification, no return. I tried them on. The first accepted my foot like an institution reluctantly recognizing an appeal. The second pinched. Same arc size, different fit. She measured with a brass rod. The right boot was shorter by half a finger. Old leather shrank. She said matched by category. I looked at the SV seal on her weights. Category wasn't function. That sentence cost more than the boots. Barney said he liked her. We negotiated a 28, plus a shirt and trousers for 21. Total 49. Ivara paid. Edrin wrote everything. Tobin signed the boots were functional. The owner disclosed the size difference. 3 copper returned to the road reserve. I changed behind canvas. The shirt fit badly. The trousers ended above my ankles. The belt had survived a divorce. The boots were ugly. Both soles touched the ground. For the first time in Garrick, nothing sharp entered my foot. I almost respected civilization. Almost. Across the lane, an old woman placed winter hides on a merchant scale. He added a blue brass weight. The balance dropped. Damp scrap, 6 copper. She said he'd sold her last bundle as winter grade. After drying and certification. Same scale, different category. I looked at my boots, then the SV seal. One scale for buying, another result for selling. The old woman gathered her hides with shaking hands. As she passed, she said the quiet scale was always balanced. She tightened her grip. Just never for us. The old woman's words hung in the cold air. Just never for us. I should have let her go. I had new boots and 4 people who couldn't speak for themselves. But I measured things and never learned to stop. I called wait. She stopped without turning. I said the same scale had weighed her hides, once as winter grade, once as less. She looked at my boots, then away with the accuracy of someone disappointed by helpful strangers. I wasn't registered, couldn't complain. I agreed, but I could watch. The merchant wasn't the villain the moment wanted. Tired man, cracked hands. The categories weren't his, he only read the seal. Barney said in a language only I understood that the scale was balanced but the definitions leaned. Assessor Coral approached in a gray coat with the same seal, carrying a lacquered case. Let's not argue. Let's measure. That was the point of the quiet scale. I liked him immediately, which was inconvenient. He weighed the hides, pressed a moisture card against the thickest one. Damp. Winter hides carried water. Water wasn't leather. The purchase category adjusted for moisture, protecting buyers and lowering what she was paid. I asked for the numbers. 11 pounds of hide. Moisture deduction nearly a fifth. Winter purchase 11 copper. He tapped the resale line without being asked. Dry weight, cured grade, resold 31. The same hides earned her the low number and him the high one. And the difference was water that left for free in his store. Coral paused. The standard reduced fraud. Before the seal, 3 merchants used 3 different pounds. The quiet scale was the same everywhere. That wasn't nothing. I agreed. I wasn't arguing with the scale. I was arguing with who owned the words on the page. On Earth, I'd sat on a committee that wrote such words. It felt like fairness, but was only consistency. It took a ruined girl's attendance record to learn the difference. I let the survey open. It made the crooked line hold still. A category, a deduction, a fee, and in smaller type an appeal. Coral's answer was honest, which was worse. 15 copper per item to appeal, refundable if it succeeded. Reassessment within 30 days, goods held dry under seal at the office. 15 copper to appeal a hide she'd been paid 11 for. 30 days, she couldn't eat. The appeal was real. It was only priced for people who didn't need it. Edrin had already drawn a column on the cargo copy. Purchase category, resale category, the moisture credit that appeared going in and vanished coming out. Appeal fee. No editorializing. Just evidence, dated and filed. Recorded, he said low. It changed nothing today. It was the only honest thing I owned. a written account no seal had approved. Coral closed his case. A decent man defending a system he'd helped build who'd never been on the wrong side of its smaller print. He said I spoke like an assessor, but carried no weights, no seal, no registration. Whose measure was I offering instead? I had no answer. Level 3 body, 26 mana, borrowed boots, and a talent for seeing crooked lines. No instrument anyone had to respect. I admitted none. Yet, Coral glanced at Avara, Tovin's tail, the rescued near the stable wall. His tone cooled. Unregistered persons with undocumented goods and coin were easy to reclassify. He'd register if he were me. Before someone less patient read our party the way I'd read his table. He touched his seal and walked away. The old woman gathered her hides. I had nothing to give her that wouldn't come from 80 copper I'd promised others. I said I was sorry. She said no one fixed it any morning. But she looked at me longer, the dismissal gone. I'd counted it right. That was more than the ones who wore the coat. I stood in the mud with my matched boots and my exact, useless understanding. Barney said I'd discovered that being right wasn't a currency here. If I wanted to argue with their measure, I needed one of my own. Something they couldn't recalibrate while I slept. A tool, and when the patient man ran out a point, Ivara said we weren't fighting certified accountants with a level 3 farmer. I agreed. We were going to register. Legally. Loudly. And I was going to carry a measure they didn't own. Marked. Honest. Mine. She called it a ruler flat. A ruler that reached? I said and reached back. The South Way House bell rang the hour, and the quiet scale office opened its shutters for a fair, standardized, perfectly balanced day. The smith's yard smelled like cold iron and regret. I had 11 copper, a debt of 49, and a rule about not touching the 80 protected for the 4 kids who couldn't argue yet. So I couldn't buy a spear. I'd have to earn one, which was a wild sentence in a world that had tried to kill me 4 times in 2 days. So said I was technically carrying a fragment of a god, and fragments got discounts. I told him fragments got you arrested. Barney actually agreed with the god for once, saying I was the only man who could turn a stick into paperwork. The Way House had a dispute. 2 carters screaming over a barrel of salt. I offered to settle it for a fee. The clerk squinted, but I wasn't certifying anything, just measuring. I opened a narrow survey and let the system run the arithmetic out loud. The salt had drunk river damp on the road and swollen. Nobody cheated. The weather did. The carters stopped shouting, which was apparently worth paying for. The clerk handed me 12 copper and told me mining villages east of here paid for honest counting. Bronze Warren especially. Czar said the ruler and grudge thing was a whole personality. I ignored him. 12 copper bought a lot if you bought ugly. An ashwood shaft gray with age. A chipped iron head the smith had written off for scrap. An hour with a borrowed file working it back to a true edge. Then I cut notches, 1 thumb width apart, checking each against a knotted cord until the shaft wore a ladder of small exact scars. A reach I could read in the dark by feel. Czar said I was making a school ruler with a knife on the end. I told him I was making a measure nobody could recalibrate while I slept. When the last notch was cut, the system gave me a new skill. Boundary spear, rank F. Mark a measured line and hold it. Reach before force. Terrible balance. Garbage accuracy. Minor mana cost. Basically a weapon designed by an accountant. Barney said an F-rank skill was a promise, not a weapon. We left as the frost was lifting. We did not get far. A mossback grazer decided we were the threat and charged downhill through the ferns, all that moss-heavy weight behind branch antlers. Ivara had a knife. Tobin had claws. Neither reached far enough. Barney said, unhelpfully calm, that now would be the moment for reach. I planted the spear. The notches told me the distance before my fear could lie about it. I set the iron head at the exact reach where the antlers were not yet and held. The balance was awful. The shaft kicked and the point wavered. For one white instant the antlers were inside the reach, and I was done. Almina said one word. Left. I threw my weight left because that voice had never been wrong. The antler raked my forearm instead of my belly. The spear scored a line across the grazer's shoulder. Not a wound. A boundary. The animal understood the line. It shied and crashed off through the ferns. I sat down hard in the wet. The measure had been true even when my hands weren't. I looked at the seventh notch, dark with grazer blood, the exact distance where the antlers crossed in. My measure was right. My arm was slow, 2 different failures, and only one was fixable with practice. Barney said I'd want a better head before the road got honest about what lived on it. Ivara wrapped my forearm without being asked. She said we needed to register somewhere that wasn't theirs. Bronze Warren, 2 days east. They paid for honest measures and didn't care whether the quiet scale liked me. I set the spear's iron head against the mud and left one small mark pointing the way. We were late for work. Day 3. 60 hours since starfall clearing. This world had billed me for water, shelter, clothing, 1 spear, and most of the skin on my left forearm. We rested at a stream, and Almina lost patience with my breathing. Said I gulped mana like a drowning man. She made me sit against rock, breathe through the nose, attention on the slow places. Water moves, she said. It does not hurry. Copy it. Somewhere around the 10th minute, I felt it. The slow seep at the bottom of myself where mana had been draining since the hollow choir, finally easing shut like a jar, finding its lid. Not filling, just not emptying anymore. The system gave me measured mana breathing. Rank F, improved recovery while stationary and calm. Useless in panic or combat. And then it thanked the stream. Almina said it had better manners than some gods. Czar sounded wounded. By dusk, we'd climbed into broken boulders above the road, and Barney went wrong. He just stopped, ears flat, every hair standing. Blood, he said. Mine and the grazers. It had been reading us off the road for an hour. Then he said one word. Bramblejaw. A territorial predator built, like a bear grown, through a briar hedge. Level 13. We were level 3. The system said do not fight it fairly. It came out of the ferns with no roar, just the crackle of briars parting. Shoulder high, wide as a cart, hide a lattice of root and thorn with old bones grown into it. Ivara spotted the gap between the boulders. Make it come narrow. That was the whole plan, and we built it in 30 seconds because we'd survived worse together. 5 strangers now moved like one animal deciding where its teeth should be. Edrin threw smoke across the left approach. Tovin went high. Ivara stood off-angle. I planted the spear at the gap's throat, 7th notch, and held. Barney walked out in front of us all. He told me to hold my line. He would lend them his age. The Ravager hit the gap like weather. The spear scored across its snout, did nothing, and the balance flaw dragged the point wide. The jaws came through the gap I'd promised to hold. I held anyway, mechanically, the way the 7th notch demanded. And the 2 heartbeats I bought were the 2 heartbeats everything else needed. Almina said now. Barney became something else. Wrong-sized, fast in a way that made the Ravager look planted. He took the left foreleg at the joint, and the crack rolled off the boulders. The Ravager slewed into the rock. Tovin dropped onto its shoulders. Ivara's arrow went in behind the jaw hinge. Almina said reach. The throat crossed the 7th notch. This time my hands were not slow. I drove the spear into the soft dark under the jaw, and the animal's weight did the rest. Tovin slid off the carcass and started laughing the ragged laugh of someone who'd just been alive on purpose. The system confirmed the kill, but held progress for verification. I asked if it was auditing me. Almina said levels were wages, and mine was still being counted. Czar said even the miracles here had accounting departments. Barney limped back, dog-sized again, looking enormously pleased with himself. I said he had explaining to do. He said he was old and I was nosy, and closed the subject. We worked until dark harvesting the carcass. Bark hide plates, thorn fangs, sap glands Edrin wrapped like glass. And under the left ear, half grown over with bark, I found a ring of black iron, old, pierced through the flesh, stamped with a mark too worn to read. It was owned, or marked, once. Ivara said somebody lost it, or let it go. Nobody said the word tracker. It sat by the fire with us anyway. Edrin counted it up. 70, 80 copper if buyers were honest. I did the arithmetic I'd been carrying like a stone. 49 debt, a spear needing a real head, for people needing names and papers. For the first time since Starfall clearing, the numbers reached. Far east under the first stars, a dull orange smear on the horizon. Bronze Warren. I check my notches by firelight. All there. All true. 60 hours in this world, and for the first time it owed me money. Day 4. 73 hours since Starfall clearing. One debt of 49 copper. 80 protected. 48 for the road. And on the sled, briar resin glands losing value every hour. Edrin said they'd sour by tomorrow night. Fresh, worth more than everything else on the sled. Dry, worth an apology. Bronze Warren was not pretty. It was working. Terraces cut into the hillside, chimneys in rows, ore sleds crawling switchbacks, everything the color of bronze dust. At the gate, I stopped because the gate was a scale. A scale the size of a wagon built into the road. Every cart and sled weighed. Numbers chalk public on a slate board. Sir said it was my kind of church. The calibration weights hung on an open chain. Anyone could check. The gate clerk took our names, temporary marks, 1 copper each, everything recorded aloud. No seal, no tricks, just weight and business. A courier was having a bad day. Small, forgettable, keeping her voice level. She said the ambush at the 3rd marker wasn't guessed, it was known. She'd filed that route in this office. The clerk said routes leak. She took her rejected complaint back, and passing our sled, her eyes met mine long enough to say you saw that too. She dropped the name, Sook, like leaving it where careful people could find it. I noticed the clerk noticing us. Quick eyes on the sled, the wrappings, the cat dog. He told us the Assay house was on the 3rd terrace before anyone asked. We hadn't told him where we came from. Ivara's eyes narrowed. No, she said. We hadn't. The Assay house had chain scales, chalk prices, reference resin colors, so sellers knew what fresh meant. The assayer handled the glands like a midwife. Fresh, barely. Plates and fangs 52, glands 26. 78 copper. Honest kill. I said honest, glad to be asked. Then she turned the last plate over and stopped. The iron earring lay there, tagged because Edrin tagged everything. Her face went blank on purpose. She said the ring wasn't materials, keep it. I said she'd seen one before. She said ring twice for disputes, which wasn't an answer, and counted out 78 copper like closing a door. Outside, we did the allocation on the steps. 49 copper crossed my palm back into the common fund, and the debt on my chest since dawn in a market lane was simply gone. I waited to feel lighter. What I felt was a column that finally summed. Ivara said I could keep a share. I said next time. 15 to the way house for the 4. Ivara counted it. Edrin recorded it. Barney approved by falling asleep on it. The bell went while the ink was wet. An ore sled had slipped its shock, half a ton of rock walking downhill with a man's leg pinned. I was moving before the 4th bell. I planted the spear across the switchback, 7th notch to the wall, and became a fact in the road. I yelled stop in my best committee voice. The street obeyed. Weight likes a boundary, and so do frightened men. The foreman looked at the gray notches on the ashwood and said, measured hands. Asked if I was hiring out. I said, depends what's broken. He told me to come to the borough board and pick. The board was a wall of small emergencies. Low on the wall, one noticed nobody had signed. Wash channel fouls uphill of the tailings. 20 copper. Edrin said water doesn't foul uphill. I said no, it doesn't. Water that lies. The quiet scale all over again, except the scale was a stream. I put my name mark on it. My first paid civic contract. At the posting board, the helpful young clerk copied our names with particular care, smiling at the letters. He welcomed us to Bronze Warren. His name was Rezhan Dor. Day 5. The guild opened its 6th bell, and I was 4th in line. The hall shared a wall with the Assay house, which told you everything about this town. Fighting monsters and weighing them were the same department. The registrar was a broad woman with a voice like a door with good hinges. I said my trade was measurement, survey, problems with numbers. She looked at the notched spear, at Barney asleep on Tovin's shoulder like a scarf with opinions, and said we were the sled crew from the switchback. She laid 4 strips of pale bark on the counter. For copper ahead. The card was bark, and I should mind the missing part. No wax. She said sealed bark carried a lord's crest, his wax, his man, his debts. Unsealed bark answered to the ledger and nobody else. Out here, unsealed was the whole point. I repeated the word, and something in it sat down beside me like an old friend. 16 copper for 4 cards. Barney got entered in a margin with more dignity than most people got in the main column. She said the wash channel notice was already stamped to us, making it a work order, making the findings evidence. Falsify them, and the bark burns. Then she said the channel job had hung on that wall since midsummer, and nobody signed it. I should ask what the ones who didn't sign already knew. The system chimed. No warmth, no light. An accountant behind my sternum closed a file. Verification bundle complete. Level 3 to level 4. Mana, endurance, reason, mana control all went up. Czar said I was measurably harder to kill, emphasis on measurably. Almina said the system was learning what I was for. The liability arrived fast. A thin young man from the posting office copied our names for the route insurance pool. Names, ranks, declared trades. Public information. I watched him and understood I had just become findable. Registered, ranked, filed by the sort of office where a clerk sold tomorrow to whoever paid. Barney said the card giveth and telleth everyone where you sleep. On the steps a woman in mill leathers stopped me. Her brother, the brake rail yesterday, he kept the leg. He'd limp. She said it like an audit. Then she pressed 2 eggs into Edrin's hands and walked away. Edrin entered the eggs into the ledger. Czar said the economy of gratitude was notoriously undertaxed. We walked the wash channel before noon. Stone-lined runs feeding the washing troughs, tailings heaps below where waste should sit. The water above them was wrong. Not always. Dawn samples came in clean. Mid-morning came up gray with a mineral bitterness Tovin could taste at 10 paces and a film clinging to the vial like a bad conscience. Same channel, same stones, 3 hours apart. The survey said the foul source sat above the troughs with no natural inlet. Contamination was intermittent. The water had a schedule. Barney sniffed the film and pulled back offended. Milslick, crushed dust, and quench oil. Industry washing its hands. The mill bell rang shift change. Tovin's ear turned. The water at our feet went gray again. On time. Edrin said the channel kept office hours. Nature didn't keep hours. Payrolls did. I uncapped the ink and told them to witness the vials. When this survey landed on the council's table, it wouldn't be an opinion. It would be a boundary with a date. I wrote the first line. Contamination correlated with mill shift change. Natural cause excluded. High above, the bell finished ringing. Somewhere in the posting office, 4 newly registered names sat waiting to be sold. And the water, having done its shift, ran clean again until the next bell. Day 6 in Sylphenia. We hit the mountain shoulder before first shift bell while the water still ran clean. Edrin walked the channel with vials, looking like a man reading a will. Clean at the 3rd patch. Then at an old side mouth, the stone changed. I crouched down. An ore culvert, dead vein, choked with old tailings. Across its mouth, half hidden under moss nobody disturbed, ran a new iron sluice gate. Oiled. Someone maintained a dead culvert nobody used. I ran my thumb along the track, and the grime came away clean, the way it does when something gets used often enough to stay wiped. Back on Earth, I'd audited a school that swore a building was empty. Found the truth in the one radiator free of dust. People lie in ledgers for years. They have a harder time lying to the dust. Barney sniffed the track, tail stiff. Quench oil fresh. And something down the throat, eating what the tailings killed. He told me I was about to survey a predator's pantry. Czar called it a murder with plumbing. I ran the survey. Abandoned culvert with a maintained sluice, opening on the shift bell. Contamination delivered, not leaked. The channel had an operator. Right on cue. The bell rang, and the culvert breathed. Cold rot pushed up the dead throat as a mechanism somewhere below took the bell as its cue. What came up wasn't the operator. Low and long, color of wet root. A bloodsap stalker, level 12. 3 ranks above me in a gap barely wide enough to swing in. Ivara asked about terrain, which in this party was basically a prayer. I told Edrin to seal the vials. Tovin high, Ivara when it commits. Barney said he'd make it regret its address and vanished under the first lunge. The boundary held. The stalker scored a red line across my forearm, and got nothing else. Tovin on its spine, Ivara's arrow in the jaw hinge, Barney taking a hind tendon with the casual cruelty of something very old. It died wedged in its own pantry. The water came up behind it gray and bitter and on time, carrying the day's poison toward the troughs where the town washed its children. I stood in the foul water bleeding and watched the schedule keep itself. It was a valve. Somebody opened a sluice on the bell and ran the mill's washings down a dead culvert into the clean channel above the troughs, where the tailings law couldn't see it. A young mill hand came up at the sound of the fight. Didn't reach for a weapon. Reached for the only defense he had. The mill fed 300 families. Shut the wash, shut the mill. Half the town didn't eat by winter. The ponds silted up and nobody gave them coin to dig new ones. He looked at my ledger like a blade and said, "Righteous men always got people fired." It wasn't a lie. That was the trouble. I told him he was right and watched him flinch at agreement. I wasn't going to shut it blind. I was going to make the choice visible, put a name on the hand, and let the town decide out loud what it had been deciding in the dark. He said that was comforting, not comforted, and went back to his shift. Ivara said he'd warn them. I said good. Guilty men moved when they were watched. Movement was dated too. Almina called it efficient with the flatness she saved for things she found obscene. Edrin did the arithmetic nobody wanted. The mill had to wash its, or slurry had to go somewhere. Ponds cost money. Somebody decided the town's water was cheaper. That wasn't a broken channel. That was a policy. I drew the whole mechanism in the ledger with the cold precision of a man building a gallows out of numbers. Ivara asked whose key, binding my arm tighter than the wound needed. I said that was tomorrow's survey. Below us the bell finished ringing and the water ran gray toward the town that weighed everything except who was allowed to poison it. I capped the ink. We do this properly. We sold the bloodsap materials that afternoon. 26 copper, 6 to the tithe, 20 to the fund. I was starting to find the honesty of Bronze Warren more unnerving than any fraud. Fairness at the gate and murder at the spring. I went after the maintenance record. The borough clerk, Rezhan Door, clean-shaven with quick eyes, laid the volume open. No contract on the upper channel. Nothing ran up there. Wasn't even on the water map. I told him there was an oiled iron sluice up there, and iron didn't oil itself. His sympathy arrived and withdrew in one practiced motion. File it. He'd enter the complaint. He warned me to be careful up those old cuts. Things lived in them. So I'd noticed. The salve maker moved the whole thing sideways. She came back with a boy and an earring in her open palm, the one Edrin had never stopped tagging. She was afraid. Her cousin ran mules on the North Road. After 3 ambushes, beasts in it that shouldn't have been. Wrong for the season. One the patrol put down had a ring like this behind its ear. Marked beasts on filed routes, right before the insurance men came round. The forgettable courier from the gate stepped out of the crowd. Sook. She looked at the ring the way a surgeon looks at a tumor she'd been chasing across 3 patients. The route insurance pool copied every filing twice a day. Names, ranks, roads, times. All crossed one desk before the bandits heard a word. She'd spent 4 months proving which desk. I just walked out of the one room she couldn't get into, holding the one thing she couldn't find. Tovin made a low sound. The clerk. This morning. He smelled of the same oil as the gate. A smell was only a smell until something gave it shape. Door processed route insurance and borough maintenance, and the paperwork for a channel that officially didn't exist. A clerk who could make water not exist could make a road dangerous and call it weather. Same hand, 2 ledgers. Czar said my poisoner and bandit broker were the same man. Almina said it was a person who'd learned this town trusted its honesty so completely it never audited the man who kept the honest books. The system chimed. 1 operator, 2 frauds, 1 blind spot. The town didn't audit its auditor. Proficiency ticked to 4.1%. The system really knew how to celebrate with a rounding error. I said we'd make it way, not by accusing him. He'd make the accusation not exist. We'd do it the way the town understood. Edrin asked if I want a public audit with a level 4 card and 6 days of standing. I said I wanted the council to ask him one question his own ledgers couldn't answer. Sample day. He controlled what was written, but not what the water did at the bell. I couldn't outfile him. I could outmeasure him. Suk looked at me for a long moment. For months. And the man who cracked it was a foreign auditor who fell out of the sky with no shoes. Barney said I'd had shoes eventually. It was a whole ordeal. She told me to give her the hour. She'd bring the witnesses that couldn't be bought. Above the town, the mill bell rang the change of shift, and somewhere up a dead channel the water reported for work for the last few days it would ever get away with it. The council met in the Way House, because in this town the room where you settled arguments had the biggest scale in it. Most honest thing I'd learned in 6 days. I didn't bring an accusation. I'd learned on Earth that a clever man could make an accusation disappear. I brought a prediction. At the forenoon shift bell, the fourth terrace troughs would foul with crushed rock and quench oil. I hadn't asked them to believe me. I'd asked them to wait. Dorr said the upper channel wasn't on the water map. No contract, no record. We were being asked to convict a blank page. Good move. Half the council nodded. I told him he was right. There was no record. That was the whole crime. A thing with no record couldn't be taxed or blamed. The water didn't exist on paper, which was exactly why it carried what the law forbade. I set 2 vials on a great scale. Clean and gray. The record was his. The water wasn't. Shall we ask it? Suk's witnesses didn't look like much. 3 couriers, 2 mill hands, the salve maker, a patrol woman with a marked beast ring. They stood along the wall like a row of small, stubborn facts. A thin counselor asked what happened if the water ran clean. I said I'd leave town and leave my card. But I didn't choose the hour. The bell did. The bell rang. Nobody breathed. Vermal, who held 3 council seats through his mills, watched the water pipe outlet like a door he'd bolted. The water came clean for 10 heartbeats, and Dorr's shoulders loosened. Then it went gray. On time, in front of 9 seats and a room of witnesses. I said nothing. When the water testified, the auditor held his tongue. A counselor drew gray fingers from the trough and stared at them like his own hand had lied. The thin merchant didn't ask for my card. Dorr said it wasn't proof of a sluice, but his voice had found a higher note. I agreed. The water proved the crime. This proved the hand. I laid the field ledger on the scale. Sluice drawn to scale, bell times, temperatures. Beneath them, Suk's tally, the patrol woman's testimony, the salve maker's ring. The road ledger running through the same desk. One clerk made water not exist and roads dangerous and sold the cure for both. The bell belonged to no one. The room turned toward the clerk's table. Then toward Vermal. He stood, old, square, unashamed. He didn't deny it. The ponds silted in a season. He'd asked 4 years for coin to dig new ones. The council refused and told him to keep the mills open. He inherited the choice from every one of them who wanted the ore and wouldn't pay for the ponds. He looked at me and said I'd made it visible. Now the town got to be shocked at a decision it made together. It wasn't a lie. That was the trouble with all of it. The system delivered its findings. Sluice sealed, audit opened. Proficiency to 4.6%. Civic contract complete. 20 copper reward. I've been paid to prove their water was killing them and handed a receipt. The council sealed the sluice that hour. Door stood down, pending audit. The marked beast ring went into a drawer. And it cost. By evening, the mills cut a shift. 40 families who drank the poison also lived on the wage that poured it. Some blamed the foreign auditor for the empty pot. Not the man who sealed the sluice. Not the council that starved the ponds. Ivara said I looked like a man who won and felt like one who didn't. I made a hidden cost visible. That was all a survey did. It didn't make the cost go away. It just decided who got to see it. I turned the 20 copper over and didn't feel rich. Barney said I was improving. Almost no one wept. Sir said I put a mill master and a clerk on the same scale, and that was either the beginning of something or a good way to get knifed. Omina said both, historically. Below us, the water ran clean for the first evening in longer than anyone wanted to admit. And in a doorway across the square, a woman with a healer's satchel watched me being blamed and made a private note. The sickness the water put in the children didn't seal when the sluice did. Day 7. I'd sealed the sluice yesterday and been thanked by no one who mattered. A season of poison didn't drain out a child overnight. I found that out in the poor quarter. The licensed clinic sat behind a clean door and a clean price. The mill families who'd lost a shift to the relining I'd caused couldn't pay full. So the clean door stayed clean. The other door was in a cellar with a line. The woman working it didn't look up. Middle-aged, hand-stained green. She asked if I was the survey hunter. Her records were worse than the clerk's. I said she was Cora Pell. She said she was the reason 40 families with no wage still had children that week. The mother at the front looked at me without gratitude. I shut the wash. Her boy coughed. Her man was home 3 days with no shift and a cough in the water I'd only just noticed. Thank you for noticing. Without heat, which was worse. I stood out of the line and watched her work. Fast, kind good. And cutting her medicines. A fever draft that should have run amber ran pale. She gave it to a coughing boy, told the mother 2 spoons, not 1. I said she was diluting. She said she was dividing. 1 vial cost 60 copper, treated 1 rich child. Cut 4 ways, 15 a child, 3 of 4 poor ones got better. The only arithmetic that fit in a cellar. She told me to ask about the 4th child. The one the diluted dose didn't save. She always knew his name. The clinic never let him through the door, so their hands were clean and hers were green. Go ahead, audit her, shut her cellar, explain to the other 40 why the dead went up the day the honest man arrived. Czar said this one was not a fraud. Almina agreed. A person doing an impossible, some with the wrong tools, calling it a sin so no one took even the cellar away. I stood in the green dark and felt the oldest shape I knew. The scholarship room. A formula measuring merit, and never who'd been given the medicine to show it. I didn't tell her to stop diluting. Telling people to stop without changing the arithmetic, just move the dying somewhere you couldn't see it. Her dilution wasn't the crime. The hiding was. A cut dose a mother knew was cut was medicine. A cut dose she thought was full was a coin flip in the dark. We'd stop the hiding. Mark the strength on every vial. Post the real prices. Find supply that didn't force the quarter dose. Cora laughed. Who funded a cellar the guild pretended wasn't here? The same burrow that found 20 copper for a survey it didn't want to hear. She was the water's second bill. I couldn't make her legal, but I could make her visible and priced and stocked. None of it required lying to a mother again. She was quiet, the way people were when offered a tool instead of a rescue. Mark the vials. She'd wanted it for years. Told herself the poor couldn't read the marks. Then she met a man who taught goblin children to read out of spite, so that excuse was dead. The system assessed. Dilution was rationing, not fraud. First public health disclosure standard. Proficiency crept to 4.8%. I was gaining levels at the speed of a glacier calving. I wrote the first standard in her cellar while a coughing boy slept through it. It wouldn't save the 4th child who'd already died. It might save the next one. Cora said I'd make enemies of the clinic. I said I'd made better enemies this week. A mark on a vial that had never carried one. A prize posted where a lie used to stand. She asked if I did this everywhere. I said 8 days. Asked me again at 80. Barney told her I'd do it everywhere. It was a condition. No draft for it. He'd looked. Day 8. Clean water for a 3rd morning. Clean water wasn't the same as a full pot. So far, I'd given the poor quarter the right to be hungry without being poisoned. Barney said I'd fixed nothing, just stopped making it worse. The second hardest thing a ruler ever did. I said I wasn't a ruler. He said I'd signed a survey, settled a dispute, and drafted a health standard in 8 days. A ruler the way a falling man was an acrobat. The terrace had water and no food, and slope. South-facing shelf warmed by the mill's waste heat, wet with clean runoff, doing nothing. On Earth, it would have been allotments inside a week. Here just a slope nobody owned. I had a reason now, but no idea how to make water climacterious. A voice behind me, flat with contempt, measuring the fall with a stick like it was going to volunteer. Head shorter than anyone in the party, built like a bracket. Goggles and dark hair, forearms freckled with burnt spatter. A high goblin looking at my spear the way I looked at a rig scale. Vesriket before I asked. She ran the pump crew, but the guild wouldn't let her sit the engineer's exam. Fetched and carried for men who thought a head of pressure was a kind of hat. She knew every stone leaked, and every man who signed for the water didn't. That runoff drowned the low end. I needed a contour ditch, 3 baffles, a settling box, and someone who'd done the sum. Looking at her, Couldn't afford her. I said draw it and handed her the ledger. The stop of someone braced to be dismissed who'd been handed the pen. She drew. Contour ditch, 3 baffles, settling box, fall labeled. Obviously right. The answer I'd have paid 60 copper and 3 days to get wrong. The guild exam cost more than the pump crew made, plus a sponsor's wax no one gave a goblin. She said don't bother. Men had promised before. Just a nicer leash. I said I didn't have a lord's wax. My own card didn't have one. She looked up. But I had a survey the borough paid for, a shelf nobody owned, and 20 copper from proving a counselor poisoned his town. I could hire the person who'd drawn the only correct thing I'd heard all morning. Day rate, her name on the plan. She gave me the look Sook and Cora had given me. A competent person offered a tool instead of a leash, not trusting the difference was real. Day rate in writing. Edrin writes it now. Stop wasting her heat shelf. Already pacing, muttering baffles. The system closed the longest file of the week behind my sternum. Channel sealed. Monster killed above my weight. Hidden hand public. Healer visible. Dead slope toward food. Verification complete. Level 4 to 5. Max mana to 137. Administrative survey went from F to E. The tool ranked. My first crooked line talent to grow up. Ivara said something happened. Survey went to E. Deeper reads, more noticing. Not historically restful. Sook brought good news. My 15 copper reached the 4 at Southway House. All still breathing. A debt paid to people who couldn't thank me yet. I said the ledger saw it. Edrin wrote it down. Sook said that was the most revealing sentence I'd said to her. To nobody, Edrin agreed, writing Vezra's contract. Almina said I'd built something instead of only exposing. Remember which the town would forgive. Zar said the other kind was why someone would knife me eventually. But today, I invented allotments and hired the person angrier than me. Savor it. I did, until the patrol horn sounded twice from the north road, thin and wrong. Something from the high forest, moving toward the farms. Barney's tail went stiff. A migration call. The forest moving its children away from something, and that something coming down the same road as my harvest. 8 days. He warned me about landing forward. I capped the ink. The next thing didn't feel like a burden. It felt like the empty column balancing. Work that was mine, in a town I wasn't willing to lose. Note the time. Give me a map of the North Road. We took the North Road at a jog because the migration horn doesn't wait for a man to finish feeling good about himself. I had exactly 100 steps of satisfaction before Zar ruined it. He asked what the 12 were. The 12 unclaimed things sitting in my status like decorative placeholders. I stopped so fast Hoven nearly ran me down and opened the window I'd been swatting away for a week like a notification I meant to read later. 12 unallocated attribute points. Levels 2 through 5, 3 per level, never assigned. I've been walking into monsters at a quarter of my own strength for 8 days because I never read the one ledger that was mine. Barney sat down in the road and made a sound that was equal parts grief and joy. The auditor, he said, had been fighting underbuilt the whole time because he left 12 points at himself in a drawer like unopened mail. Almina nearly shouted, which from her was practically a sermon. Zar pointed out most men squander their points on strength immediately, while I filed mine neatly and planned to get to them after the quarterly review. I crouched at the road's edge and read myself. STR 12, AGI 11, YND 13. The sheet of a clerk who walked a lot. No wonder every fight felt like holding a door shut with my whole life. I'd been winning on terrain and other people's teeth because my body was a rough draft I'd never revised. I wanted to dump it all into intelligence. Almina pointed out endurance was what let me stand in bleeding water long enough to find the sluice. I thought about the mill hand's arm that reopened twice and the plain arithmetic of intending to be alive at Chapter 80. So I did the sensible thing, which for once was also the humble one. Strength and agility got 2 each, endurance 3, intelligence 1, perception 2, will 2. It felt like a coat I hadn't known I was missing settling over shoulders cold for 8 days. The ache in my forearm dimmed. The road suddenly felt like ground I could push against. We crested the ridge, and the record stopped matching because the forest was coming down the mountain. Not attacking, fleeing. Hundreds of grazers poured through the ferns, antlers down, eyes white. The whole herd mind of the high would running from something it wouldn't face. They were the danger's shadow thrown ahead, and they were pouring straight toward the seed shelf Vezra had planned that morning. 2,000 hooves would erase her contour ditch before noon. I planted the measured spear, and for the first time it didn't feel like a stick I was hiding behind. We didn't fight a migration. We steered it. Tovin and Avara took the west shelf with noise. Edrin marked the fall line. Barney went to see what a whole forest was afraid of, since apparently he was the muscle now. And behind the fleeing herd, something rose against the morning and looked down the valley at the town. The system gave me the first cold line of a number I wasn't going to enjoy. Rank C or higher. Recommendation was not to measure this one from the front. The driver came out of the tree lean, and I finally understood why a whole forest would rather run into a mining town than look at it. A gorelacer, but wrong. Its forelimbs had gone to armored stone. Its horn had split into a battering crown. It came down the slope with slow grinding certainty and walked through every grazer that couldn't get out of its way. Level 46. Rank C. We were level 5. Edrin called it a siege engine with opinions. Barney was back from scouting, ears flat. Something upslope had ruined the thing's range. It wasn't hunting. It was fleeing forward, straight through everything smaller than its fear. I couldn't kill it. You probably couldn't either. But it didn't want the town. It wanted away. Given away. My newly built body held ground where a week ago it would have been shaking. I planted the spear and let the survey run deeper than ever. 16 perception feeding the skill until the valley resolved into slopes and pressures, a ledger written in stone and water. There was an old flood cut on the east face running away from town. Wide enough for the herd if we opened the fence line. We turned the herd. Let the monster follow the only moving thing left that isn't us. The seed shelf was on the west fall line, which was exactly why we make west loud and east quiet. Tovin and Avara went west with noise and fire. Edrin dropped the east fence. Barney went to be the wrong behind them and remind 2,000 cousins that down and east meant not being eaten. It half didn't work. The herd hit the fork in a screaming brown flood, and for 3 heartbeats, it could have gone either way. I stood at the seam with a notched stick and a body 8 days too new, making east the answer to a question the herd was already asking. The spear wasn't a barrier. It was a bias. I felt the decision arrive the way I felt a fraud in a ledger. I leaned my whole 16 endurance body into being the wrong side. The tide turned east. A dozen broke west, and one clipped me down to one knee. On 13 endurance, that would have been the end. On 16, it was a bruise and a man getting back up. The herd poured down the flood cut, and the gorelacer brute, 46 levels of driven stone, followed them into the cut and away. It didn't even look at us. We survived by not being the most interesting thing in its morning. The valley emptied. The seed shelf stood. Vezra's contour ditch was intact to the last baffle. She didn't thank anyone, which was its own kind of thanks. The system closed the account. Level 5 to 6. 3 points auto-allocated. I told Avara. She said teaching a stampede to read a map was the impressive part, not the number. Barney trotted back. The brew was a mile down the wash and still going. Then he asked what I'd been not asking. What makes a gorelacer brute that scared? Edrin said it wasn't a bigger monster. The whole high would emptied clean at once, like a room when the landlord shows up. Animals don't flee a predator like that. They flee people. Faint through the quiet came the flat, patient chalk of iron on wood. Something being built or killed on a schedule. Sook arrived at a dead run and said somebody was up there working the high wood while the forest ran. That wasn't poaching for the pot. That was poaching for a purpose. I felt the old clean click of a crooked line standing still long enough to be named. Tomorrow we go up and audit a forest. Day 9. We went up to audit a forest that had already been audited by someone with a colder pen. The killing floor sat in a clearing loud with flies instead of life. Not a hunt. A harvest. Snares and grids, culls sorted by size. At the center, brood carriers, the great slow females the herds followed, opened and stripped of the one organ each carried. Everything else left to rot. Whoever did this walked past 100 copper of meat to take the single part that mattered on a schedule until the survivors drove a rank sea brute through a town. Sue crouched by a carcass. Brood glands. Only one kind of buyer wants the part of an animal that makes more animals. Someone's breeding stock or ruining someone else's. The shape stood still. Larger this time. Tame at first predators don't come from catching wild ones. You raise them, need brood glands, kill the mothers, let a stampede cover the noise. The poaching wasn't the crime. It was the supply line for the road monsters. A voice from the treeline said that was a good guess for a man with a stick and no jurisdiction. Joran Funt, lean, weathered, flat eyes of someone who'd made peace with something long ago. 2 hired thugs, bored. Dog's too quiet. He said I'd cost him a season's brood. Walk back down, collect my 20 copper, feel righteous. Make it more, and his employer made me less. Neither of us wanted to meet him. No law up here, no writ above the tailings. He wasn't the villain of my ledger, just a line item. Kill him, and there's another Joran by the new moon because the gland price hasn't moved and the man who sets it isn't here. The system agreed. Joran was a node, not the source. Cannot be closed by force. The price sets the crime. I told him he was right. His shoulders eased. Agreement is the answer none of them braced for. I wasn't going to arrest him. I was going to make this what claimed. He went still. The borough can't write a warrant above the tailings because officially nothing up here is worth governing. But I'd spent 3 days teaching a town that a thing with no record is where the crime hides. A stewardship claim, a warden, a registry. It makes the supply visible. Visible supply gets taxed, tracked, cut off at the buyer. The gland price climbs. The cheap supply of road monsters becomes expensive and traceable. That's not righteousness. That's raising his employer's costs until the crime stops paying. Joran said I was going to get him killed by making him worthless. So I offered him the warden's job. He knew every snare line on this mountain, worth more counting herds than killing them. It came with a borough wage and a reason for his employer to believe he'd died stupid instead of turned. His muscle didn't appreciate the lecture. One came in fast. A week ago, I would have died. On 17 and 14, with the boundary spear planted and a body that finally answered, I took his charge on the notched shaft, turned it, and put him on the ground. Tobin had the second before he drew. Ivara's arrow stood in the dirt an inch from a dog's nose. Barney looked at the dogs, and they decided elsewhere. The system leveled me to 7. New skill seed, field command, incomplete. I've been doing it long enough to notice. Joran watched his muscle put down by a level 6 clerk and did the arithmetic. A man who could do that was a better bet alive than the employer who'd let him hang. He said, warden slowly, under what registry, since there was no writ up here? I said there would be by the new moon. Bring me every snare line and the name of the man who bought glands. I held out a hand. Not mercy. Contract. Not the villain of my ledger. A line item that moved to the right column. We came down at dusk with a poacher turned warden, a map of a supply line, and the first thread of a name running off the edge of Bronze Warren towards something larger. The system closed day 9. Level 8. 3 points into intelligence, perception, and will. Field command advancing. Ivara said level 8 in 2 days from 5. I said I'd found 12 points in my pocket and stopped nearly dying, and that turned out to help. Barney said the man was finally worth the paperwork, and he wanted it in the record. Edrin said it was in the record, because of course he'd already written it down. Below us, the lights of Bronze Warren came on one by one. A town that 8 days ago had never heard my name and now couldn't quite manage without me. I walked down a body that finally held my weight, doing the only sum that mattered. How to make a broken place run straighter before something worse than a stampede came down the road.